Today we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed. Get ready for 20 of the most disturbing encounters on lonely Texas highways that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. The sun had long since slipped beneath the horizon when Daniel Mercer found himself on a highway that seemed to stretch into nothing. He had been driving since early afternoon, pushing his battered Ford sedan through the Texas flatlands, the sort of landscape that felt like it went on forever. It was mid-August and the air was heavy with the dry, suffocating heat of the day, though now the night had cooled it just enough to let the windshield fog in pale streaks. His destination was unclear even to him. He was running from the mess of a divorce in Dallas, running from paperwork and phone calls and a house he no longer felt was his. He had no plan except to keep driving south until exhaustion forced him to stop. The first whisper came just past midnight. At first he thought it was the wind pressing against a crack in the window. It was low and thin, like the hiss of someone breathing very close. He adjusted the rearview mirror out of habit, as though seeing the empty back seat might silence the illusion. Nothing there. Only his crumpled duffel bag and the faint gleam of headlights a half-mile behind. He turned up the radio, but the signal dissolved into static as though the air itself had decided to stop carrying music. 10 miles later, the whisper came again. This time there was shape to it, the faint curl of words. He slowed the car, his stomach tightening. The voice was unmistakably human. His hands clenched the wheel and his eyes darted once more to the mirror, empty. Yet, the whisper slid up the back of his neck as if someone leaned close enough to speak, directly into his ear. He pulled off at the next shoulder, gravel crackling under the tires. He sat with the engine idling, listening. The fields around him stretched wide and silent. Nothing but telephone poles and the black suggestion of trees far away. He checked the back seat again, running his hand over the duffel bag, over the floor. Nothing. When he returned to the driver's seat, the whisper slipped through the air again. Clearer now, keep going. His scalp prickled. He gripped the mirror with one hand, tilting it sharply up toward the roof so he wouldn't see it anymore. The voice did not stop. He told himself fatigue was playing tricks, that the exhaustion of 12 hours behind the wheel was sowing voices into the static of his own thoughts. But when he put the car in gear and pulled back onto the highway, the whisper followed. Sometimes it was a murmur, barely audible. Sometimes it sharpened into something like command, keep going. South. By 2 in the morning, his nerves were raw. He stopped again at a gas station whose neon sign sputtered like a dying insect. The place was open but empty, only a drowsy clerk behind the counter. Daniel took his time, walking the fluorescent aisles, grabbing bottled water and a pack of crackers he didn't want. He lingered, listening. Nothing. The store was silent. The voice seemed tethered to the car. When he returned and slid behind the wheel, the air inside felt different, close and damp like a basement. He jammed the key into the ignition, eager to prove himself wrong, to prove there was nothing waiting for him. The moment the headlights cut across the asphalt, the whisper returned. You're almost there. He nearly shouted into the empty car. Almost where? His voice cracked. His hands were trembling. The mirror reflected nothing but the dark sweep of road behind him. He drove with it tilted away, but he could feel it pulling at him, begging him to look. By 3, the voice had multiplied. Not one whisper, but several, overlapping, crowding together like a congregation speaking half in unison, half in argument. He tried to drown them with the radio, but every station was dead, filled with hissing and warped fragments of voices that blended with the ones inside the car. His destination appeared just before dawn. The highway curved toward a small town he did not recall seeing on any map. A green sign flashed by too quickly to read. The voices surged with urgency. Turn left now. His hands obeyed without conscious thought. He veered onto an exit ramp that dropped into the shadows of a town that felt deserted. The streets were cracked, lined with houses whose windows were boarded or broken. No light burned anywhere. The air was still, heavy with the stink of stagnant water. He slowed, every muscle begging him to turn back. But the whispers filled the car until it felt like the back seat was crowded with people leaning close, guiding his every breath. He followed them to a narrow street ending at a dried-up lake bed. The shore was cracked clay, the water a black puddle glimmering faintly under the fading stars. The voices fell silent all at once. The sudden absence was worse than the noise. His ears rang with the void. Daniel stepped out, knees weak, heart racing. He looked back at the car, half expecting to see someone seated in the back, but the glass reflected only his own pale face. The air by the lake was foul, as if something long dead had been disturbed. He turned to leave, but the silence shifted. The ground near the puddle stirred. Figures rose slowly from the muck, slick with black water, their faces half familiar. He recognized them with a horror that rooted him to the spot. His ex-wife, his father, the neighbor who had died 2 summers ago. Faces he knew, faces that should not be here. Their mouths moved, but no sound came. He stumbled backward toward the car, fumbling the door open. When he glanced into the mirror, their whispers poured through again. Deafening this time, a tide of voices calling his name. The figures moved closer, their bare feet dragging through mud, arms reaching. He jammed the car into gear and roared backward onto the street. The mirror shook with shadows that were not there when he turned to look, but always waiting when his eyes flicked forward again. He drove until the sun rose, until the landscape opened back into familiar stretches of highway. By then the whispers had faded, replaced by the roar of wind and his own thundering pulse. But when he finally pulled into a diner at the edge of another nameless town, when he finally cut the engine and let his forehead rest against the steering wheel, he heard them again, faint and patient, "You'll come back," and he knew with a sinking certainty that they were right. The road from Abilene to San Angelo cuts through land so dry and spare it feels more like the husk of the earth than a place where anything living might settle. If you drive it during the day, you'll see mesquite trees bent low by the wind, fields of cracked dirt, the occasional lonely windmill turning slow against a white sky. But after midnight, the highway changes. The stars seem sharper. The silence presses closer, and if you look into your rear view, you'll sometimes catch the drifting particles before you even notice them on the hood of your car. Fine gray ash clinging to the glass, the paint, the metal. At first you think it must be dust or soot carried from a far-off grass fire, because Texas is full of both. But it isn't. Wipe it with your sleeve and it smears oily, leaving a darker streak. Turn your wipers on and for a moment the windshield clears. But then the ash comes again, settling thicker, as if it's falling out of the empty sky. It happened first to a trucker named Harlan, or at least he was the first one they talked about. He pulled over at a gas station in Robert Lee around 2 a.m, muttering about some strange coating on his rig. The attendant remembered the man well enough. Big guy, oil-field hands, a smoker's cough. He asked if there had been a fire nearby because his cab was covered in gray stuff, even though the sky was cloudless and still. He went inside for coffee. When the attendant came back out to hand him change, the truck door hung open, radio hissing static. No Harlan. The keys dangled from the ignition, still warm to the touch, but the man himself was gone. The only thing left was a light drift of ash across the seat, collecting like snow on the worn leather. The sheriff wrote it off as a runaway or a drunk who'd wandered into the scrub, but folks who knew the road whispered otherwise, because that wasn't the last. A month later, a sedan was found just outside Sterling City. Empty, doors locked from the inside, headlights still shining into the dark. A half-drunk Big Red sat in the cup holder. No driver. Just that gray film all over the windshield, coating the dashboard, thick enough to leave handprints if you pressed your fingers into it. Except when the deputies tried, the prints wouldn't stay. The ash seemed to shift back into place, filling itself in as though the car wanted to stay untouched. They towed the vehicle back to the lot, and by dawn it was spotless, as if nothing had ever clung to it at all. People began to tell stories. A young woman driving alone after a late shift swore she saw figures standing on the roadside where the highway bends near Lake Spence. Not hitchhikers, not people exactly, just outlines, upright shapes like smoke given weight. She tried to keep her eyes on the asphalt, but when she glanced at her mirrors, the back seat looked hazy, full of floating flecks. By the time she reached the county line, her lungs burned like she'd breathed in a furnace. The next morning, her Civic was found abandoned on the shoulder, empty, doors unlocked. The seatbelt still pulled tight as if she'd just unbuckled herself. She was never seen again. No one can explain why it happens only after midnight or why it's only that stretch of road. Some say the land remembers. There was a fire decades back, a prison transport bus that overturned in the dark. The guards got out, but the inmates were trapped behind iron grates, screaming as flames consumed the bus. The bodies burned down to bone and dust, and the ashes blew across the prairie. Folks said the county buried what they could in a shallow trench and poured quicklime to hide the stink. But the wind never let go. That ash is what falls now, they claim. Carried by no storm, born from the mouths of the dead who never left the highway. Others believe it's older than that, tied to Comanche raids or to something deeper, something that was never meant to be disturbed in that desert dirt. I drove it once myself. That's how I know the stories aren't just talk. It was late September, warm night, no moon. I was heading west, trying to make San Angelo before dawn. About halfway there, I noticed the faint dust beginning to settle. So light I thought my eyes were playing tricks. I hit the washer fluid, swiped it clean. 10 minutes later, the glass was clouded again. Then heavier, thicker, as if someone were scattering cigarette ash by the handfuls across my hood. I rolled down the window, and the smell that came in wasn't smoke. It was sweet and rotten, like old meat left in the sun. I tried to ignore it, but when I glanced at the passenger seat, I swear I saw the impression of weight pressing the cushion down, as if someone invisible had climbed in. My radio crackled, the station breaking apart into static. Then beneath the static, voices. Dozens of them, low and desperate, whispering words I couldn't make out. I pulled over, heart pounding, headlights cutting a cone into the dark. The ash was falling steadily now, coating the windshield so fast I could barely see out. I opened the door to get air and felt something cold against my leg. Not wind, not air at all. More like fingers brushing, probing. My breath caught, and for a second I couldn't move. The night around me felt crowded, heavy, as though figures pressed in close, though none were visible. The radio whispers rose in pitch, almost pleading. I slammed the door, floored the gas, and drove the last 30 miles with the wheel slick in my hands. When I reached the first lit intersection in San Angelo, the ash vanished. My windshield shone clean. My seat was empty. But when I looked down, my jeans were smeared gray from the thigh to the knee, as though something had clutched me and left its dust behind. I never drove that road again. Most folks I know avoid it now, taking the longer route through Bollinger or Bronte, even if it costs an extra hour. But the ones who don't listen, the ones who take the shortcut after midnight, they're the ones you read about in the paper a day later. Abandoned vehicles found idling on the roadside, sometimes still running until the tank runs dry. Always empty, always spotless by morning, as if the highway swallows not just the people but the evidence they were ever there. The deputies still write their reports, still chalk it up to missing persons, but the locals know better. If you roll down that way after dark and you see the ash starting to settle on your windshield, don't stop, don't slow down, don't even look in the mirror. Just keep driving until the sun comes up, because once it's inside the car, once you breathe it in, there's nothing left but silence. And the next traveler, come dawn, will pass your car sitting lonely on the shoulder. Doors locked or open, it doesn't matter, with nothing inside but a faint gray coating that no hand can wipe away. The sun had already dropped below the horizon, leaving a reddish smear across the sky that looked more like an open wound than a sunset. I was driving west out of a dying little Texas town called Murdoch, the kind of place where the storefronts sag and the people don't bother looking at you when you pass through, as if they've already decided you don't belong. I had a tank half full, the radio tuned to static, and an uneasiness crawling up my spine that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the town, it was the road. Highway 66, or what was left of it, ran in long black stretches between patches of prairie and dry creek beds. The asphalt was cracked and buckled in places, so old it seemed more like a scar than a road. I'd noticed something when I first left Murdoch. The tires didn't hum the way they usually do on blacktop. Instead, it felt like I was pressing down into something softer, something with a little give. At first, I told myself it was the heat warping the pavement, the way August in Texas can melt tar like butter. But as the miles dragged on, I realized the feeling wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting worse. It was subtle. The car didn't bounce, didn't shift, but the way the steering wheel pulled ever so slightly like the road wanted me to let go was enough to keep my knuckles white on the wheel. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I could have sworn the stretch behind me looked longer than it should. I'd passed a broken-down billboard for Dr. Pepper 3 times. Same ripped canvas flapping against rusted steel supports. Same graffiti sprayed across the bottom. Once maybe I could chalk it up to déjà vu. 3 times though, no way in hell. That's when I pulled over. I sat there on the shoulder, engine idling, staring at the cracked asphalt under my headlights. The road surface was darker than it should have been. Not just worn, but almost wet-looking. I opened the door and the heat hit me like a furnace. The cicadas screamed from the grass, and somewhere way off in the distance a dog barked, but otherwise the prairie was empty. I crouched down and touched the road. It wasn't hot. It wasn't even warm. It was cold. Not like the cool relief of shade either. It was the kind of cold that bites into your fingers. The kind that feels like something under the surface is drawing the warmth right out of you. I snatched my hand back and stood up, my heart hammering harder than I wanted to admit. The headlights caught something further up, maybe 30 yards ahead. A shimmer like heat waves off the pavement, only the air had already cooled to the sticky night chill. I got back in the car and told myself I'd drive through it, floor it if I had to, and not stop until I hit the next town. But the next town never came. The shimmer didn't vanish behind me the way it should have. It stayed out front, sometimes closer, sometimes further, but always there, and the odometer didn't match the distance I knew I'd traveled. After what felt like an hour, I should have been 20 miles past Murdoch. Instead, the numbers barely ticked up 5. I turned the car around, swearing under my breath, and drove back east. 10 minutes later, the same Dr. Pepper billboard leaned out of the dark, same torn canvas, same spray paint. That's when the road started to move. At first, it was just the sensation of a gentle tug under the tires, like hitting a patch of deep mud. Then I heard it low, groaning like wood bending under strain, except it came from below. The steering wheel jerked in my hands, pulling hard right. I fought it, but the car was sliding, not from rain or oil, but because the road itself had begun to sink beneath me. The blacktop was dipping, sagging like stretched skin, and I knew with a gut-deep certainty that if I didn't get off right then, I wasn't going to get off at all. I slammed the gas, tires squealing, rubber burning. For a moment, the road let go and I shot forward. But in the mirror, I saw it. The asphalt rising back into place behind me, sealing over like nothing had ever happened. No cracks, no dips, no sign the road had tried to swallow me whole. Just an endless ribbon of black stretching into the dark. I drove until dawn without stopping. By the time the sky turned gray, I was shaking with exhaustion. That's when I finally saw lights ahead. Flickering neon. A diner squatting on the roadside like a mirage. I pulled in, parked crooked, and stumbled inside. The place smelled like grease and burnt coffee. A couple of old men hunched over their mugs, and a waitress in a faded pink uniform leaned on the counter. "You look like you seen the devil," she said without looking up. I laughed, a thin, cracked sound, and told her about the road, about how it pulled and stretched and breathed beneath me. The 2 old men exchanged a look but didn't say a word. The waitress just poured me coffee, set it down, and finally met my eyes. "Road's hungry," she said. "Always has been." I stared at her, waiting for her to smile, to tell me she was joking. She didn't. "They built over something that don't sleep," she went on, voice flat, like she'd said it 100 times before. "Buried it deep, thought blacktop would hold it down. But things like that don't stay buried. Not forever." One of the old men muttered something under his breath, but when I asked him to repeat it, he shook his head. I didn't finish the coffee. I got back in the car and drove north, away from 66, away from Murdoch, away from anything that looked like cracked asphalt. I don't care if it takes me a week longer. I won't set my tires on that road again. But here's the thing. Last night, parked in a motel lot 200 miles away, I dreamed of the sound. That low groan, that sucking pull, the pavement stretching thin like skin ready to tear. When I woke up, my car was sitting 2 inches deeper into the gravel than it had been when I parked. And this morning, when I checked the odometer, it read the same number it had when I left the diner. The blacktop feeds. And once it's had a taste, I don't think it lets go. Highway 287 cut through the night like a scar, empty and endless. The flat Texas plains stretching on all sides without so much as a flicker of life. My fuel gauge hovered above empty, the needle trembling as though it too were nervous. I'd been praying for a sign of civilization, a gas station, anything at all, when I caught it. A rusted metal sign leaning at a tilt, almost unreadable, but there all the same. Rest stop, Tawaitus 19. No mileage, no arrows, just the words burned into the metal like an afterthought. I had driven this stretch more times than I could count, and I'd never seen it before. The turnoff was a gravel track choked with weeds. My headlights cut a weak path, bouncing against old fence posts until the shape of a building emerged from the dark. It was low and cinderblock gray, a squat shadow hunched beneath buzzing sodium lamps that spilled jaundiced light across the lot. The pavement was cracked, potholes brimming with stagnant water. Only one car was there, an old Buick, paint the color of faded seafoam. Windows fogged from the inside as though someone sat in there breathing slow and steady. I killed the engine and got out. The air smelled wrong. Mildew, copper, something sharp and bitter that clung to the back of the throat. The lamps hummed overhead, flickering, stuttering, sometimes blacking out for a beat too long. The restroom door stood propped open by a brick, and as I stepped inside, the smell thickened, damp and metallic, like wet pennies and rotting leaves. The fluorescent lights above sputtered and groaned. The mirror above the sink was fractured, cracks branching outward like veins. I leaned toward it, weary, running on caffeine and miles. I blinked. My reflection blinked after me, just a fraction late, as though it were following instead of mirroring. My chest tightened. I blinked again. The reflection followed late again. Then it smiled. My lips stayed flat, tight with unease, but its grin spread wide, teeth too white, too sharp. The cracks in the glass split the smile into shards, each piece wider than the last. Behind me, a stall door groaned open, slow, steady, though I hadn't heard anyone come in. I turned, the door yawning wide to nothing but darkness. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not from the stalls, not from the vents, but from the mirror. A ragged inhale, a wet exhale, fogging the fractured glass. My reflection leaned closer, though I hadn't moved, fogging harder, eyes narrowing. I stumbled back, slipped on the damp tile, and bolted for the doorway. Outside, the lot had changed. The Buick was gone. In its place was a black station wagon, windows tinted too dark, though a glow pulsed faintly inside like a lantern flickering. My own car sat where I left it, but my keys dangled from the ignition. I slapped my pocket empty. A cold line of sweat ran down my spine. The wagon's door creaked open. A figure unfolded itself, too tall, head bowed, clothes ragged and colorless. It looked up and its eyes were wrong. Not empty, not dark, consuming. They didn't reflect light, they ate it. The thing began moving toward me, steps jerky, uneven, faster with every lurch. I clawed at my car door, locked. Inside, my reflection sat in the driver's seat, head cocked at an angle no neck should bend, grinning, fingers tapping the wheel in rhythm with my heartbeat. I ran. Not to the road, not to escape, but into the field, tall grass cutting my arms and face. I didn't think, I just moved, crashing through until the grass gave way to trees I had never seen before along this highway. Behind me, an engine roared, headlights flaring between trunks, sweeping the ground like searchlights. I pressed against a tree, my breath shallow, waiting. The engine died. Silence poured in, heavy, endless. When the sky lightened gray at dawn, I found myself sitting in the center of a dirt road I didn't recognize. My clothes were soaked through, muddy, my body trembling. My phone was dead. No cars passed until a farmer's pickup rattled into view. He asked me what the hell I was doing out there. I told him about rest stop number 19. His face went pale. Said there hadn't been a rest stop on that stretch in 30 years. Burned down. 3 people died inside. Sometimes, he said, at night folks still see the lights. I've looked for it since in daylight, searching mile by mile. There's nothing but flatland, wire fences, endless horizon. But at night, when my fuel runs low and my eyes grow heavy, I'll catch a glimpse in the corner of my vision, a rusted sign tilting in the dark. And if I let my eyes close too long, I can hear it again. The wet, dragging breath from behind the glass, waiting for me to stop. The first time it happened, I thought it was just age creeping into the truck. A 2005 Silverado with more miles than sense, it had its quirks. The radio cut out on sharp turns. The AC wheezed when the heat rose above 90. And the passenger door had always been a little loose on the hinge. But that night on the back road between Mineral Wells and Weatherford, when the latch gave a sharp metallic pop and the door shivered open 2 inches, I felt the kind of cold that doesn't belong in Texas summer air. A breath rolled in, damp and heavy, thick with the smell of something that had been left in the sun too long. Rot, not of animals, not of garbage, but sweeter, like fruit left to blacken, like a wound gone bad. I pulled over fast, more out of instinct than thought, and slammed the door shut. The handle felt slick under my hand, though I hadn't been drinking and hadn't touched anything greasy. The latch caught. I yanked it twice to be sure, then drove the rest of the way with the windows down, convincing myself it was nothing. Metal warps, seals fail. Trucks grow old just like people. But the next night it opened again. Same time, near the lake this time, when the moon had settled low and the crickets sang. Click, hiss, cold. The door eased itself open as though someone had pressed from the inside, not pulled from the outside. The air that came with it had weight, the way swamp air carries weight, clinging to the back of your throat. And when I leaned just enough to pull it closed again, I swore I felt breath on my neck, wet and shallow. Not wind, not imagination, breath. I started checking the latch during the day, wore myself out tightening screws, oiling hinges, even replaced the lock assembly at a shop in Weatherford. The mechanic joked it was haunted and I laughed with him. But when he handed me the keys, his face looked stiff, like the joke had curdled in his mouth. "Keep it locked tight at night," he said. He didn't charge me for labor. For a week, nothing happened. I drove in daylight, kept to errands. But on the 7th night, after driving home from Fort Worth late, I heard it again. Click. The door nudged open just wide enough for cold to spill inside, thick with the same rot. This time I didn't stop. I kept driving, every nerve in my back alive with the sense of someone leaning forward behind me. My headlights painted the empty highway ahead, but every so often I caught in the mirror what looked like a shadow pressed against the seat, hunched low, indistinct. I told myself it was the reflection of my own fear. Told myself it was exhaustion. But when I got home and killed the engine, the passenger door stayed open. I hadn't touched it. I stopped sleeping after that. Or if I did, I woke up with the sense that someone had been sitting on the edge of the bed, just out of sight. I'd hear the faint pop of a latch in my dreams, then snap awake to silence so thick it hummed in my ears. I began parking the truck in the yard instead of the drive, as if distance from the house could help. It didn't. The door clicked open without the truck even running, sometimes in the dead middle of the night. My dog, a cattle mutt who barked at everything from delivery men to stray cats, stopped going near it. He'd growl from the porch instead, low and steady, eyes fixed on the passenger seat. One night, desperate, I decided to watch. I left the truck parked facing the road, turned off the porch lights, and sat in the dark with only a six-pack and a baseball bat for company. Hours crawled by. The cicadas gave way to crickets, then the night turned quiet. Too quiet. When the click came, I nearly dropped the bottle. The door slid open 2 inches, same as always, and the air that rolled out seemed thicker than smoke. My dog whined once and bolted under the house. I waited, bat in hand, but nothing moved inside. Nothing visible. Still I felt it. The weight of a gaze, the press of a presence. Then, slow as a hand turning a page, the door closed again. It latched itself. Click. That was the first time I realized it didn't need me to shut it. It could do that on its own. I tried selling the truck. Posted ads met buyers. Every single one found some reason to walk away. One man, a rancher from Palo Pinto, got in the driver's seat, leaned across to check the passenger latch, and went pale. He didn't even test the engine. Just stepped out, shoved the keys back into my hand, and drove off without a word. I lowered the price twice, then stopped trying. The truck wasn't going anywhere. By then, I'd stopped using it. I drove my wife's car, claimed the gas mileage was better, but the truth seeped through. She asked once, late one night, why I kept the truck if I hated it so much. I didn't have an answer. I couldn't tell her that every time I thought about junking it, I'd wake to the sound of the latch popping open in the yard and feel cold air pressing against the bedroom window. Like the truck was reminding me it was still there, watching, waiting. The last night came without warning. I'd fallen asleep in the recliner, TV buzzing static, when a draft cut through the house, cold and thick with that rot. Not from the truck outside, from the hallway. I stood, heart pounding, and heard it clear as day. The sound of a latch giving way. The bedroom door eased open. My wife stirred in bed, half asleep, and murmured my name. I couldn't move. The darkness in the hall seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. Slow, wet, heavy. The air shifted behind me, brushing the back of my neck, and I knew without turning that it had left the passenger seat behind. Whatever had been riding with me all those nights wasn't in the truck anymore. It had found the way in, and as I stood frozen in the stale breath of it, the last thought that crawled through my mind was that I should have kept driving. Never stopped. Never let it grow curious about the house, because doors, no matter how often you lock them, can always be opened. And some passengers don't ever plan on leaving. The highway felt like it had been built for me alone, unspooling through the Texas night with no headlights ahead and no taillights behind. The signs had started back near the last town, promising fuel, food, and rest at exit 47. They were clean, new-looking, reflective green against the blackness, their arrows assuring me that salvation was just a few miles ahead. I had been driving too long, chasing distance for reasons I couldn't have explained if someone asked. Something about needing to keep moving, to put as many miles as possible between myself and whatever I had left behind. My tank had dipped past a quarter, my stomach gnawed at itself, and I was running on burnt coffee and restless nerves. So when I saw that first sign for exit 47, I felt a knot of relief in my chest. A gas station, a diner, maybe a motel with a working lock. It sounded like a blessing. But the miles kept passing and the exit never came. Just more signs, the same promises, the same arrow pointing straight ahead into nothingness. Exit 47, 2 miles, exit 47, 1 mile. I slowed each time, expecting to see the curve of a ramp branching off, but it never materialized. The road didn't change. No ramps, no intersections, no glow of fluorescent lights on the horizon. Just 2 lanes of cracked asphalt bordered by fields so dark they seemed bottomless, the night pressing in heavy and thick. The next sign would appear again, shining clean and insistent as though I had looped back around. Exit 47, 2 miles. My stomach tightened and I pressed harder on the wheel, telling myself fatigue was playing tricks, that I had zoned out and missed the turn. I promised myself I would watch closer this time. But still, there was nothing. I checked the dash and a cold sweat prickled when I saw the needle had dropped below 1/8. The fuel gauge was moving faster than it should have, like the tank had sprung a leak or the car had developed a thirst of its own. I tapped the glass, hoping it was just a stuck needle, but the engine coughed in response, a low complaint that made my skin crawl. I told myself not to panic. There were rules to driving lonely highways at night. Rules every Texan learns young. Keep calm, keep steady, don't do anything stupid. I repeated them under my breath like a prayer. The signs came again, unwavering. Exit ahead, 1 mile, half a mile, then nothing but the straight and endless road. Time thickened. I chewed the inside of my cheek, hands locking tighter on the wheel, the car humming louder as though it too was straining. Hunger clawed at my gut, sharper now, and my tongue felt swollen with thirst. It didn't feel like hours anymore, but days, as though the road itself was stretching time along with distance. My phone sat dead in the cup holder, drained to nothing. No clock, no way to measure what was passing. I thought of pulling over, just killing the lights and waiting for dawn. But every time the idea crossed my mind, a picture formed behind my eyes, of the black fields pressing closer. Something watching from beyond the fence line, something that would notice if I stopped, so I kept moving. The first real change came when the lights of a diner appeared in the distance. My heart leapt so violently I almost laughed. A squat building set back from the road, neon buzzing red against the dark, and a single sign over the roof. Diner, all night. I slowed, pulling across the gravel lot, but unease twisted inside me. There were cars parked at the side, 5 or 6, all different makes, all coated in dust thick as a second skin. They didn't look abandoned so much as forgotten, left to dissolve into the earth. I stepped inside and the smell hit me first. Grease, coffee, something faintly rotten underneath. The booths were filled with people, or at least they looked like people at first glance. Their faces sagged slack, their hands motionless on the counters, their food untouched though the plates steamed. A waitress stood behind the counter, her uniform crisp, her hair pinned in a neat blonde swirl. Her smile never shifted when her eyes locked on me, and for a moment I thought she hadn't blinked at all. "Coffee?" she asked, voice bright and hollow, already reaching for a pot. I nodded because my throat refused to make sound, and when she poured the cup I saw the liquid was thick and dark, syrupy, clinging to the porcelain. It smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. The hunger in me screamed, but something deeper said, "Don't drink." I forced myself to put the cup down untouched. The people in the booth shifted then, all at once, turning their heads in slow unison toward me. Their eyes glistened too much, the whites reflecting the diner lights like glass marbles. I stood up fast, muttering something about needing to go, and the waitress's smile stretched wider, teeth too white, too even. I stumbled back out to my car, gravel crunching sharp underfoot, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, the diner was gone. Just black fields again, rolling endlessly into nothing. The gas light blinked on. The engine began its steady cough, louder now, as though protesting every mile. My hunger turned feral, a gnawing pain that left me trembling and my lips cracked dry as dust. The sign still appeared, glowing clean and insistent, promising a salvation that never came. Exit 47, 2 miles. I tried turning around once, spinning the wheel hard to double back, but the road only curved subtly and delivered me into the same stretch of blacktop, the same green sign floating ahead. I thought about those cars at the diner, the dust so thick it could have been decades, and I wondered how many others had driven this way before me, chasing the promise of an exit that never existed. The thought rooted deep in my skull, cold and certain, that maybe the road didn't lead anywhere at all, that it only stretched on, feeding on time, draining fuel and flesh until you simply ceased to be. The last thing I remember is the needle sinking to empty, the engine shuddering once before it died completely. Silence fell so heavy it rang in my ears, broken only by the faint rustle from the fields, something moving just beyond the edge of the dark. I sat gripping the wheel, my stomach screaming, my throat closing with thirst, and I thought I saw lights ahead. The promise of another diner, another chance. My legs moved without command, door creaking open, gravel crunching underfoot. But the blackness was thicker now, almost alive. The signs glowed still, impossibly bright, whispering of exit 47 just ahead. I kept walking toward them, though each step felt heavier, as if the road was pulling me deeper into itself. And I understood then that there was no exit. There never had been. Only the endless stretch of blacktop waiting to swallow me whole. Highway 287 cut through miles of empty scrubland in North Texas, a road so straight and lonely that even the gas station seemed to give up on it. The overpass was just concrete and rust, a scar across the prairie. Truckers passed it without thought, a gray stretch above the blacktop, but the locals whispered about it in the kind of half-serious tones people use when they want to be believed, but don't want to admit they believe it themselves. At 3 a.m, they said you could hear someone crying down there. Not wailing, not screaming, but sobbing. Thin and human, like a child trying not to be heard. If you stopped, if you went down the dirt shoulder and walked beneath the bridge, you didn't come back. They said the missing weren't silent afterward either. Their voices leaked into the static of radios for weeks, stuttering through broken signals, a chorus of panic and agony buried under country songs and weather reports. It was a story I heard first at a diner outside Wichita Falls. The waitress said it quiet, sliding me my coffee like she regretted opening her mouth. A man at the counter glanced over, then shook his head, muttering not to feed a stranger that kind of talk. But once it was in my ears, I couldn't let it go. I was driving nights for a living then, hauling cheap furniture from Dallas up into Oklahoma and back again, and every route seemed to bend near that overpass. The kind of place that waits for you until your guard is down. I told myself it was bullshit. Urban legend, campfire crap. Yet I started keeping the radio low in the truck, listening for those sobs in the static. I told myself I was just curious. I told myself a lot of things. The first time I saw the bridge at 3 a.m., the moon was out, and the highway was dead. No taillights, no headlamps, just me and the hum of tires on asphalt. I slowed when I reached the exit ramp, though I didn't mean to. Something about the sight of it, the concrete underbelly caught in silver light, made me think of bones. I rolled the window down, expecting wind. Instead, I heard something else, faint but certain, a sound like someone breathing through tears. I hit the gas, telling myself it was coyotes, wind through the girders, anything at all. But when the diner waitress's voice came back to me, whispering about screams in the static, I knew I'd heard exactly what she described. It gnawed at me. I tried to dismiss it, but on my next run I found myself slowing again. This time I pulled off onto the gravel shoulder, killed the engine, and sat with the windows down. The sound was there, drifting up through the night air. Closer, clearer. Sobbing, high and broken. a sound so fragile it crawled under my skin. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands hurt, forcing myself not to move. But I made the mistake of glancing at the radio. It was off. But the display flickered faintly, as if picking up a signal that wasn't there. The digital clock stuttered, froze, then blinked back to life. I started the truck and tore back onto the highway, the sobbing following me in the air until the overpass shrank into the rear view. That should have been the end of it, but something about that sound lived in me. I didn't feel scared so much as compelled, like it had hooked some part of my brain I didn't know was exposed. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to know what was down there. The missing people, the screams in static, none of it seemed real, not until I heard it myself. After 2 weeks of fighting the urge, I gave in. I told myself I'd park, get out, take a flashlight, and prove there was nothing but graffiti and wind. I told myself I'd laugh about it later. The night I chose, the sky was starless, heavy with low clouds. I parked on the shoulder, headlights cutting into scrub, and stepped out into air that smelled faintly of wet earth. The overpass loomed above me, black against black, its concrete legs thick with shadows. I heard it right away. The sobbing was steady, not faint like before, but close, almost beneath my feet. I walked down the incline, gravel crunching under my boots, the beam of my flashlight trembling against the supports. The sound swelled as I went, until it wasn't one voice but many, layers of cries overlapping, weaving in and out of each other. Some were sharp, jagged with panic. Others were low, exhausted moans, the kind of sound a throat makes when it has no strength left. The hair rose along my neck. I swung the light across the ground, half expecting to see someone crouched in the dirt, but there was nothing, only weeds and broken beer bottles. The sobbing didn't come from the air, it came from beneath. The concrete columns seemed to vibrate with it, as though the cries were trapped inside. I pressed a hand against the cold surface and felt a shiver run up my arm. The flashlight flickered and went out. In the sudden dark, the sobbing surged, louder now, right at my ear. I stumbled back, fumbling with the light, but the batteries were dead. Behind me, my truck's radio clicked on, even though I hadn't left the keys in the ignition. A voice leaked through, jagged and broken. It was my own. I froze. It wasn't a recording, not something I recognized. It was me, screaming, begging, the sound of my own voice shredded with terror. And beneath it, faint but growing, was another voice, my mother's. She'd been dead 5 years, buried in Amarillo, but I knew her voice instantly. She was calling my name the way she used to when I was a boy lost in the grocery store, calling me home. The cries beneath the bridge shifted, swelling to a fever pitch. I heard laughter cut through the sobs, thin and sharp like glass breaking. My knees buckled. I don't remember running back up the incline. Don't remember yanking the truck door shut or gunning the engine. All I remember is the sound chasing me up the highway. My mother's voice fading into static until only the cries were left, tangled together in an endless knot of misery. I never drove that route again. I quit the job within a month, told myself I was done with highways and empty nights. But it hasn't left me. I keep the radio on low in the house now, and sometimes late at night, the signal dies for just a second. The static comes alive and I hear them. The ones who stopped. Their voices are still crying, still begging. And sometimes beneath them all, I hear myself, calling from a place I haven't reached yet. A place I know is waiting under that bridge, where the sobbing never stops. The fog had settled thick and low across the back roads of East Texas, the kind of damp, clinging fog that made your headlights useless, and your windshield wipers squeal like they were dragging across bone. You kept both hands on the wheel, squinting at the narrow strip of pavement ahead when you first saw them. 2 faint red taillights glowing like watchful eyes in the mist. They hovered just beyond reach, always there, always pulling you deeper into the gray. You told yourself it was just another late-night traveler, someone cautious like you, maybe headed home to some forgotten little house off the highway. But no matter how carefully you pressed the gas, no matter how long you followed, the lights never grew closer. They stayed the same distance away, steady, patient, pulling you along. You considered turning around once, The thought scratched at the back of your mind, made your knuckles tighten on the wheel. But when you glanced in the rearview mirror, the world behind you was gone. There was no glow of your own taillights reflected in the fog, no faint smear of road stretching back, just a wall of thick shifting gray, as though the entire night had swallowed the world behind you. That was when you stopped thinking about turning around. You couldn't, not really, because the road behind you wasn't there anymore. So you kept going. The glow ahead remained steady, twin points of red fire suspended in the mist. Sometimes they bobbed slightly, like the car ahead was swaying on uneven pavement, but they never blinked out, never slowed. The road beneath your tires began to change too. The painted lines that had divided the lanes had long since disappeared. The asphalt narrowed, then widened again, and sometimes it felt like you were driving across bare dirt, though the sound under your tires said otherwise. Every few miles you passed landmarks that didn't make sense. A mailbox leaning crooked with no driveway beside it. A rusted tractor, half sunk into the ground, its tires swallowed by weeds though you hadn't seen a single field. And once a gas station, at least you thought it was one. Its fluorescent lights dead, the canopy rotting, the pumps torn out. You slowed when you saw it, some instinct rising in you that maybe this was the place to stop, but the tail lights ahead brightened, flaring as if the driver had pressed his brake, urging you not to stray. Against your better judgment, you followed. The fog pressed harder the deeper you drove. It slid under the car doors, seeped into your lungs, made each breath taste faintly of metal. The red lights ahead began to flicker, and every time they dimmed, your chest tightened with panic, certain that if they vanished, you'd be stranded in a place that wasn't on any map. You tried the radio once, hoping for some voice to cut through the static, but the speakers spat out nothing but a low, steady hum, like the thrum of power lines far away. When you clicked it off, the silence returned, heavier than before. Even the engine seemed muffled, as though sound itself was being devoured by the fog. Hours must have passed, or maybe no time at all. The world shrank to just the glow of those two red points and the wet hiss of your tires. You noticed your gas gauge dropping lower, needle dipping toward empty, though you couldn't remember how much fuel you'd started with. The panic rose again, a steady burn in your throat. What happens when the car dies here, you thought? What happens when you're left alone with no lights to follow? But the taillights never faltered. They hung ahead, guiding you, promising something. Promising what, you couldn't say. Then, just as sudden as they'd appeared, the fog began to thin. At first you thought it was a trick, but the air lightened, shadows taking shape along the edges of the road. The red lights ahead pulsed brighter, burning through the mist, then vanished altogether, leaving you blinking into darkness. You hit the brakes hard, tires skidding slightly on damp pavement, and when the car stopped, you realized the road behind you was gone. Not hidden, not swallowed by fog, gone. In your rearview mirror, there was nothing, just a black void stretching where the highway had been. The steering wheel shook under your hands, though you weren't moving anymore. The car idled, trembling as though it too was afraid of where it had been taken. You got out because some stubborn part of you still needed to prove there was ground beneath your feet. The night air was cold and damp, clinging to your skin. You walked a few steps back, then stopped dead at the edge. Behind your car, the pavement ended clean, sheared off like someone had taken a blade and sliced the world away. Beyond it was nothing. No trees, no ground, no sky. Just endless black. So deep and wide your stomach lurched when you looked at it. You staggered forward again, toward where the red lights had vanished, and that was when you saw them. Not ahead but above. Two faint points of red light, high in the darkness, watching from the void where the road had been. They glowed with a patient hunger, and as you stared, they blinked once like a predator's eyes catching a reflection in the night. The engine died then, cutting out with a final cough. The headlights flickered, leaving you swallowed in damp, suffocating dark. And the sound came. A low, grinding rumble, like gears turning in a machine older than time, vibrating through the ground beneath your feet. You tried to run, but your legs wouldn't carry you. The black edge crept closer, the world peeling away in strips, the nothingness reaching out like a tide. The last thing you saw before the darkness took you was those tail lights descending, not guiding you anymore, but coming straight for you, brighter and brighter until they burned like fire in your eyes. Then nothing. The highway between Denton and Wichita Falls was long and lonesome, a two-lane ribbon of cracked asphalt that cut across fields of dry scrub and low hills that looked like sleeping animals under the Texas night. Most drivers preferred the interstate, wide and bright with steady streams of semis, but the old state route had its pull. It was quicker if you knew where you were going, And there was a kind of quiet beauty to it when the sun bled red over the mesquite trees. But by the time the stars came out, most folks swore they felt a weight in the air, something that pressed on the chest and made the radio sound too loud, the silence too deep when you switched it off. Stories said hitchhikers went missing along that stretch. Folks vanished in ways that left no trace. Deputies called it dust and coyotes, maybe a runaway or a drifter slipping into Mexico. People whispered different, that the road had teeth and if you stopped for the wrong soul it took you too. Lyle had been driving rigs for 30 years and didn't scare easy. His Peterbilt had hauled half the state's cattle, oil tools, and scrap metal across every lonely road Texas could throw at him. But he always felt something strange around that old highway, and tonight he had no choice but to take it. Construction had shut down the interstate near Gainesville, and his dispatcher told him this was the only way to keep his delivery on schedule. It was near midnight when he crossed the county line, headlights bouncing off the cracked blacktop, CB dead silent. He kept the wheel steady, eyes on the white lines, and tried not to think about the stories. That was when he noticed the shadow. It wasn't unusual for headlights to cast weird shapes on the road, fences, poles, the jagged silhouettes of cedar brakes. But this was different. The moon was thin and high, the fields wide and empty, and yet he saw a shape running alongside his cab. At first he thought it was his imagination, the dark stretch of brush keeping pace, but when he leaned forward, squinting through the glass, he could see it clear. It was the shape of a man, stretched tall and thin, arms moving in an even stride. No figure, no person in sight. Just the shadow itself, blacker than the night around it. He eased off the gas, heart beginning to drum, and the shadow slowed with him. He hit the brakes hard enough that the truck hissed and rattled and came to a stop on the shoulder. Dust swirled past his headlights, the fields lay quiet, and there was nothing moving but a wind in the grass. Yet when he looked down at the pavement, he saw the dark, man-shaped smear still lying there, as though something invisible stood right beside his cab, waiting. He muttered a curse, shifted gears, and pulled out again, quicker this time. He told himself it was a trick of the eyes, something about fatigue and the way the lights angled. But as the truck roared up to speed, the shadow lifted off the asphalt like it had weight, kept pace with him, and soon there was another. On the far side of the cab, a second figure stretched across the road, running effortlessly, arms and legs moving in silence. He gripped the wheel, throat dry, sweat crawling down his spine despite the AC humming. Miles rolled under him. The shadows grew darker, sharper, until they looked solid. Not just dark spots, but the impression of people. One tall, one bent slightly as though carrying a pack. Another that looked like a woman with her hair streaming. They didn't fade as the headlights shifted. Instead, they seemed to multiply. Shapes appeared near the ditches in the scrub, darting along like deer, only to gather closer until he could swear he saw dozens of them. An army of darkness keeping pace with his truck, silent, untiring, and each one casting no body, no person to make it real. The stars overhead began to dim. He noticed it when he flicked his eyes upward between gulps of breath. The Milky Way, usually sharp as diamonds out here, was smeared, then gone. The sky itself looked bruised, darker than storm clouds, though no storm brewed. He realized with horror that the shadows were climbing upward, blotting the sky, forming a canopy that seemed to fold over the highway and smother the world. The truck's beams cut only a narrow tunnel ahead, and the edges of that tunnel rippled as if pressed by something thick and breathing. When he hit Bowie, he should have seen the gas station lights glowing, the small town quiet but alive with its handful of lamps. Instead, he saw only darkness, houses swallowed, the road stretching empty. He felt a pressure on the cab then, like weight shifting on the frame. The steering wheel tugged in his hands. He turned his head and saw it. The shadow wasn't outside anymore. It was in the passenger seat. Not a man, not even a shape you could see fully, but the suggestion of one, an absence of light sitting upright, head angled toward him as if it had been riding all along. He could smell dust and rot, the odor of old leather left in a barn too long. The radio crackled, voices half-formed like 100 people whispering at once, saying names he almost recognized. His hands trembled on the wheel, and when he blinked, he saw faces flicker in the glass, pale and wide-eyed, their mouths stretched in silent screams, faces that belonged to the missing, the hitchhikers who had vanished, the drifters no one claimed. Their features merged and twisted until only hollows remained, sockets where eyes should be, mouths that opened wider than they should, all pouring out that suffocating dark. He floored the gas, engine roaring, desperate to outrun it, but the road twisted wrong, stretched long in ways that didn't belong to Texas anymore. The signs were gone, the fences bent into jagged teeth. No matter how far he drove, he remained alone in that tunnel of night with the figure beside him. Sometimes it leaned closer, and when it did, his own shadow on the dashboard warped longer, heavier, until he wasn't sure it belonged to him anymore. He couldn't even scream. The pressure on his chest was too heavy, the silence too complete. They found his rig 2 days later, idling on the shoulder near the Red River Bridge, headlights still on, trailer empty. The cab door was open, driver gone. Deputies chalked it up to foul play or desertion. But the truckers who passed that road after swore they saw something else. They said if you drove it at night, you'd see a shadow keeping pace, just at the corner of your vision until it slid into the seat beside you. And if you dared to look too long, you'd notice the stars dim and you'd smell dust, and you'd hear whispers in the radio that carried the names of every soul who had ever tried to hitch a ride on that haunted stretch. Some said the shadows never really left. They only waited for the next driver too stubborn, too tired, or too unlucky to take the long way around. The asphalt out on Route 59 looked like it was melting under the late July sun, the surface shimmering and twitching as if alive. People always said Texas summers had a way of pressing down on your chest, but out there, beyond the sagging barbed wire fences and scraggly mesquite, the heat felt more like a living thing. It breathed, it waited. Drivers kept their windows rolled up tight, air conditioners gasping against the furnace outside, and even then most of them left the road behind with pounding headaches and a kind of hollow ringing in their ears that no doctor could explain. They said it was just heat stroke, dehydration, bad luck. But if you drove it late enough, when the sky turned the color of hot iron and the cicadas screamed louder than car radios, you'd hear it too. The road itself began to scream. The first time I heard it, I was 19. I'd been drinking Lone Stars with a buddy down at the lake, and on my way back to town I hit that stretch. It started as a low moan, like an 18-wheeler bearing down in the distance, but there were no headlights in the rear view. The steering wheel vibrated as if something deep in the pavement had come alive, and then the sound rose. Metal tearing, bones breaking, a kind of long, wet shriek that made my molars ache. I pulled over, tires hissing against the shoulder gravel, and just sat there while the car rattled. The sound went right through me like it was clawing its way out of my own chest. When it finally stopped, the clock on the dash had jumped almost 2 hours ahead, and I couldn't remember anything about that time except a shadow in the shape of a man standing out in the heat shimmer. Too still, too long. By the time I blinked, he was gone. I didn't tell anyone. Folks in small Texas towns don't take kindly to stories about haunted highways. But I started watching the paper, keeping track. The wrecks stacked up, head-on collisions, people swerving into ditches, cars found idling in the middle of the road with no drivers, and always the survivors who stumbled back to town muttering about the screaming. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but everyone knew better than to drive that stretch after dark. Years went by. I moved off, came back. My father died and I inherited his place, a sagging ranch house 30 miles from that road. You'd think I'd stay clear of it, but the thing about small towns is there aren't many routes. And sometimes the shortest way is the one you swore you'd never take. I told myself I was older now, that I'd imagined it, but deep down I knew. Some nights, if the wind was just right, you could hear it from miles away, carried across the fields like a banshee. One evening on the way back from Houston, I hit the road just as the sun dipped. The sky was a blood-orange bruise, and the fields on either side had turned to black mirrors. My tires hummed, steady at first, and then the hum thickened, grew heavier, like something inside the rubber was screaming to get out. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. The sound rose through the chassis, up through my spine, and then there it was again, that tearing, that wail so raw and endless it made my stomach knot. I should have floored it, but the road felt like it was holding me, dragging me deeper. The air inside the cab grew hot, suffocating, though the vents blasted cold air. The clock ticked wrong, jumping forward in jerks, then back. That's when I saw the man again. Standing dead center in the lane, tall, shoulders slouched, head cocked. His face was wrong, blurred like a photograph left out in the rain. I slammed the brakes, tires screaming, but he didn't move. The car jerked to a stop inches away, engine sputtering. I blinked and the man was gone. Only the asphalt stretched ahead, steaming in the twilight. My ears rang, not from the brakes, but from that same metallic tearing, as though the road itself was splitting open beneath me. I thought I smelled something. Burnt hair, hot metal, and something sweet underneath, like blood cooked too long on a skillet. The next morning I woke in my driveway, car parked neatly, engine cold. I didn't remember the drive. My hands were filthy with black grit as if I'd clawed them down into tar. My boots were wet, though it hadn't rained in weeks. Inside the truck bed lay a dead coyote, jaw stretched wide in a silent scream, eyes boiled white. No tracks around it, just the body, as though it had fallen from the sky. I tried to shake it, tell myself it was exhaustion, that my memory had twisted things. But people started coming up missing. Not far from that road, not long after sundown, a farmer's boy taking hay bales across the field. A woman headed home from her night shift at the Dollar General. Even Sheriff Latham, who laughed off the stories until his cruiser was found idling on the asphalt, door wide open, radio hissing with static. They never found him. Only the grooves left in the tar like fingernails dragged down a chalkboard. The state finally closed that stretch, put up concrete barricades and warning signs. But it doesn't matter. At night, if you stand anywhere near it, you can hear the screaming roll out across the fields, low and hungry. Folks who live nearby complain of headaches, missing hours, waking up with tar under their nails. They say the road's alive, that all the years of wrecks and blood have soaked so deep into it that it grew a voice. Others whisper about the railroad that used to run alongside, about a derailment no one in town will talk about. The night dozens burned alive in the prairie grass. Whatever the truth is, the asphalt keeps screaming. It wants more. I don't drive that way anymore, not since the night I woke to find black streaks smeared across my bedroom floor, leading from the front door to the foot of my bed. The smell of tar hung heavy in the air. And for hours afterward, my ears rang with that tearing cry, so loud I thought my skull would split. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of a road that stretched on forever, no sky, no stars, only the endless black strip of asphalt beneath me, shrieking, splitting open to swallow me whole. And when I woke, there was grit between my teeth and the taste of blood in my mouth. The barricades won't hold forever. One night someone will move them. Maybe some kids looking for a thrill, maybe a lost traveler with a bad map. The road will take them. It always does, because that scream is still out there, rising through the dirt, rattling the bones of anyone foolish enough to listen, hungry for the next soul to vanish into the black. The stretch of highway between Denton and Wichita Falls was a black ribbon of asphalt, cracked and groaning under the weight of years and heat, bordered by mesquite thickets and fields that had long since turned to dust. People said the road was cursed, but they always said that about lonely Texas highways where bad things happened more often than they should. I never gave it much thought until the night I saw the convoy. It started with a glow on the horizon, faint and orange like a wildfire, but it pulsed in rhythm, 2 by 2, as if headlights were weaving through the dark. I was driving an old Chevy pickup, paint peeling, engine rattling like bones in a coffee can, and I had been awake too long. The road was dead empty, but the glow drew closer, louder, until the night itself seemed to shiver. My radio cut out mid-song, a snap of static, and then the sound came. A low diesel roar so powerful it vibrated in my chest. I gripped the wheel, heart kicking, as lights burst over the rise ahead. 18-wheelers, dozens of them lined up in perfect formation, barreling down on me with horns that bellowed like beasts. The smell hit next. Thick diesel and rubber so sharp it stung my nose and made my eyes water. I braced as the first truck whipped past. My windshield went white with light, my ears split with sound, and my body shook as if God himself had driven by. Then another, and another. Each truck was the same, chrome grills snarling, lights burning so bright I could see bones through my own hands on the wheel. Their trailers rattled with chains, and their horns screamed in a way that wasn't quite mechanical, more like something alive and angry. I swerved off to the shoulder, gravel popping under my tires, and sat there gripping the wheel until my knuckles went pale. The truck screamed past for what felt like hours, a parade of fire and steel, but when the roar finally died and the night went still, I realized I was alone. No taillights in the distance, no red glow fading away, just the whisper of wind through mesquite branches. I climbed out, legs shaking, the smell of diesel still clinging to me. I aimed my flashlight at the blacktop, expecting grooves and shredded rubber. Instead, the beam caught something else. The asphalt wasn't scarred by tires. It was clawed. Deep, ragged gouges ran parallel down the lane, like something had dug its way across the highway with talons the size of my hands. My light trembled over the marks, following them until they vanished into the night. And that was when I heard the faint metallic clink. like chains dragged across steel, far out in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I drove until dawn, hands clamped to the wheel, terrified of seeing those lights behind me again. By morning, I convinced myself it had been exhaustion, a hallucination brought on by coffee and loneliness. But a week later, I found someone else who knew. It was in Bowie, a rundown gas station where the air reeked of stale corn dogs and antifreeze. The man was old, wiry, with a face carved by sun and grief. He saw me staring too long at the road and asked if I'd heard the convoy. I told him what I'd seen and he just nodded, eyes sinking into shadows. He said the convoy had been running that highway for decades, longer than anyone could remember. Some said they were truckers who burned alive in a pileup in the 70s, their rigs twisted into black skeletons, their screams baked into the asphalt. Others swore it was older, that the road had been laid over something cursed, something that never should have been disturbed. The old man didn't care which story was true. He only cared about what came after. "They'll pass you once, maybe twice," he said, lowering his voice until it barely carried. "But if they take notice of you, if one of them locks eyes, you won't be able to shake them. They'll follow you. They'll hunt you. And when they catch up, you'll ride with them forever." I laughed it off then, though my laugh came out thin and dry. But his words festered, and I kept driving that road night after night, trying to prove him wrong, trying to convince myself it had all been nothing. I saw them again 2 weeks later. This time I didn't pull off the road. I froze, blinded by fire, deafened by horns, every nerve screaming to run. Then one of them slowed, just enough. Through the white blaze of headlights, I saw a cab window roll down. The driver leaned out, but his face wasn't a face anymore. It was blackened, melted, teeth grinning through tar. His eyes were 2 pits of orange coal, and when he pointed at me with a hand that ended in hooks of charred bone, the smell of burning hair filled the cab of my truck. I don't remember pulling over, but I woke hours later with the dawn creeping over the fields. My truck was dead. Every wire inside charred black like it had been struck by lightning. On the road beside me, the claw marks were fresh and wet, as if the asphalt itself had bled. I tried to leave Texas after that. Packed up, headed east, thinking distance would break whatever grip they had on me. But the farther I drove, the more I felt them behind me. I'd glance in the rear view and catch a flicker of orange, the shimmer of lights where no cars should be. At night, I'd wake in motel rooms stinking of diesel, my ears ringing with the echo of horns. Sometimes I'd find black rubber dust on the carpet. Once I woke with fresh burns across my arms. Thin lines like chains had been dragged over my skin. Now I don't sleep much at all. I drive mostly at night because the day feels too quiet, too false, like the sun is lying to me. And sometimes, when I catch the faint growl of an engine in the distance, I wonder how long I can keep outrunning them. How long before I make a mistake and find myself caught between their roaring steel bodies, dragged into their endless line. People say ghosts can't touch you if you don't let them, but I know better. The convoy doesn't care if you believe. They'll ride and they'll ride. Until every mile of Texas is theirs, until every soul they mark is pulled screaming into their fire-lit ranks. And when they come for me again, and I know they will, I don't think I'll fight. I think I'll turn on my headlights, grip the wheel, and fall in line. Because some roads don't end. They just go on forever, and the convoy is waiting. Always waiting. The night highway stretched out in a narrow ribbon of faded asphalt, cutting through the low Texas hills like a scar. The moon hung behind a bank of clouds, spilling only thin streaks of light that barely touched the earth, so most of what existed beyond the reach of the headlights was an impenetrable dark. Driving west along Highway 67 at midnight was like gliding through a vacuum, and I was already uneasy before the reflectors started playing their tricks. They caught my attention first as simple glints, the way they always did. Hundreds of little red and white eyes along the edge of the road, flinking against the headlights and disappearing behind me in a measured rhythm. Nothing unusual about that. But after an hour of monotony, when the late-night radio had dissolved into static and the cup of coffee had gone cold in the cup holder, I noticed the glints seemed to change. They were closer together than they should have been, tighter in formation, like the eyes of something crouched low and watching from the ditch. I shook it off at first, blaming fatigue. The road between Breckenridge and Graham was lonely, flat and easy to drift on, and I'd been behind the wheel since Dallas. But then one of them blinked. Not just a flicker of reflected light, not the stutter of my headlights on a bump. It shut, vanished for a breath, and opened again, staring right at me. And when it did, the stretch of road ahead went black. The center line, the asphalt, the distant turn I'd been expecting, everything dissolved into a wall of nothing. I gasped, slammed my foot harder on the gas, and then as suddenly as it had vanished, the road was there again. The reflectors lined up neat and steady. Red dots like soldiers at attention. No sign of the missing mile I swore had just been erased. I pulled off at the next shoulder, an unpaved strip beside a stand of mesquite. The engine ticked while I sat breathing hard, listening to the night. The cicadas had gone silent, and the air smelled faintly of creosote and something else, damp and sour, like wet cloth left to rot. I told myself it was exhaustion, the brain misfiring in the darkness, and I should stretch before pushing on. But when I stepped out of the car, the sound of gravel under my boots seemed swallowed, muffled as though the night itself was padding closer to hear me. I glanced at the line of reflectors glowing in both directions. They looked normal again, just plastic studs catching the headlight beam, but I swear I saw one twitch. A shiver went through me and I climbed back in, slamming the lockdown without even thinking. The car smelled of stale coffee and old vinyl, safer than the outside air, and I told myself I'd drive faster, no more looking too long at the shoulders. The next half hour, the reflectors didn't blink again, but I couldn't shake the sense they were following, repositioning every time I glanced away. A trick of fatigue, yes, but it carried the same queasy certainty you get when you realize someone's staring at you from across a crowded room. And then near the outskirts of Graham, I saw a shape. It wasn't a deer or a coyote. It was standing upright on the edge of the road, tall and narrow, with joints bent wrong like it didn't understand how to stand human. Its head glowed with 2 reflector dots, but they weren't attached to anything I could recognize. Just eyes shining red locked to mine. I hit the brakes and swerved, the tires screaming, gravel spitting. By the time I steadied the wheel, the figure was gone. I pulled into the only gas station still lit in Graham, heart hammering so loud it hurt. Inside, the clerk didn't look up from his magazine when I asked if he'd seen anyone out by the road. His face was hollow-eyed, skin too pale, and he said in a flat drawl, "You don't stop when they blink. Keep your lights steady, don't look too long. They notice." "What do you mean?" I asked, but he just shrugged, flipping the page. I grabbed another coffee, not for the caffeine, but to feel something warm, and got back on the road, though every instinct begged me to stay put until sunrise. The highway beyond Graham narrowed, the mesquites thinning into open pasture land. The sky was darker there, clouds swallowing what little moonlight had been left, and that's when the reflectors started closing in. Instead of staying on the far edges of the pavement, they crowded closer to the center line, some sitting at odd angles as though they'd been shoved out of the asphalt. My headlights swung across them, and each one glared back, sharper, brighter, and alive. The sensation of being watched pressed harder against my chest, and though I kept my eyes locked forward, I saw movement in the corners of my vision, the shifting of tall, bent figures pacing the car. When the first one blinked, the road disappeared again, this time for longer. I drove blind, hands clenched on the wheel, praying I wasn't veering off into a ditch. The blackness stretched endless, and in that black I saw them clearly. Rows upon rows of tall figures crouched along both sides, all of them facing the highway, all of them with shining reflector eyes that pulsed in unison as though breathing. And then the road returned. I was still centered, still alive, but the taste of metal filled my mouth and sweat dripped from my hairline. My pulse was ragged. I didn't remember breathing. By the time I reached the next town, the sky in the east was going gray, and the reflector eyes finally faded into the mundane, simple studs they were supposed to be. But the memory of that blink haunted me. When the sun came up, I stopped at a diner, ordered eggs and toast, and tried to make sense of it. The waitress poured coffee with a tired smile, but when I asked if she ever noticed the reflectors at night, her hand froze, just for a second. "They don't bother you if you don't bother them," she said softly, eyes fixed on the table. I left a few minutes later, appetite gone, and swore I'd never drive that highway again after dark. But last week, passing through the same stretch on my way to Odessa, I couldn't help but glance at the shoulder as the daylight died. For just a split second, one of those reflectors winked, and in the mirror, the road behind me wasn't there anymore. It was only black, and something in it was smiling. The salt line started out like a prank, something you might laugh about on a long, empty stretch of Texas highway. At first, you'd see a faint streak of pale white powder smeared across the blacktop, uneven and scattered like spilled fertilizer. Then as the miles dragged on, you'd realize it wasn't random at all. It was straight, ruler straight, cut across the asphalt like a scar. No matter the rain, no matter the storms that blew through from the Gulf, the line never faded. It stretched on, sometimes broken by gravel shoulders or cracked pavement, but always continuing just ahead, as if someone had taken a bag of salt and walked the road in silence for miles, never stopping, never tiring. And there was something else, something people only noticed if they drove it more than once. No raccoon darted across it. No armadillo lumbered over. The deer that crossed highways everywhere in Texas wouldn't step near it. Dogs and coyotes alike froze on the far side and turned back. The salt line wasn't just strange, it was feared. People began to whisper about what happened if you broke it. Not every tire did. A light car could sometimes skim across without disturbing it, like skimming a pond's surface without leaving a ripple. But a heavier truck or a careless driver who drifted sent the powder scattering, and once it was broken, the story said, something followed. No one could agree on what. Some claimed shadows in the rear view, keeping pace no matter how fast they drove. Others swore the radios crackled with a voice under the static whispering their names. A few, the unlucky few, were said to vanish between one town and the next. Never found, though their cars sometimes were, idling on the roadside with the driver's door hanging open, salt dust still clinging to the tires. I didn't believe it, not then. I drove that stretch between Luling and Gonzales often for work, cutting through farm roads and highways where the salt line always seemed to appear, stubborn and unbroken. I'd seen it enough times to laugh it off. Kids messing with old folk tales, I told myself. Maybe high schoolers carrying on some dare. But one night in early November, just after the clocks turned back, I drove that road later than usual. The sky was low and heavy. Moonlight drowned behind thick clouds, and the only light came from my headlights carving tunnels into the dark. I'd worked late and I was tired. Too tired to notice when my right tires drifted over the white smear across the road. I felt the crunch, faint but unmistakable, the salt powder grinding under rubber. It was a small sound, but it crawled into my chest like a warning bell. I glanced into the mirror and saw the faintest scatter of white mist lifting where I'd broken the line. Then nothing. For the first few miles, I told myself it was nonsense, just a story. I turned on the radio, fiddled with stations, caught country songs half buried in static. But something felt wrong. The road was empty, not unusual for that hour, but the silence pressed against the windows as if the night itself was listening. My hands tightened on the wheel. My foot pressed the gas a little harder. I told myself I was imagining it when I noticed the faint shape just at the edge of the headlights, far back on the road behind me. Too far for details, but there. Every time I glanced back, it was still there, never closer, never farther. A dark blot against the pale beam of my taillights. I flicked my eyes forward, then back again, and each time it seemed to shift as though it walked with my car. Not chasing, not hurrying, just keeping pace. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, but the shape remained. At the county line, I pulled into the Exxon off 183, figuring a lit place, a place with people, would shake it loose. The gas station was empty, just the buzzing of fluorescents and the clatter of an old cooler. I stood outside my car, breathing in the diesel stink, and looked back at the road. Nothing there, no figure, no shadow. Just darkness. I told myself I was tired, strung out from work, nerves playing tricks. I bought coffee, climbed back into the car, and convinced myself that was the end of it. But the next night, I woke in my house outside Luling to the sound of gravel shifting in my driveway. Slow, deliberate crunching, as though something walked back and forth just beyond the window. I lay in bed with my heart pounding, telling myself it was deer, maybe stray dogs. I didn't look. In the morning, the gravel was undisturbed, neat as always. No paw prints, no tracks at all. Just the faintest white dust on my tires, as if the salt had clung to the rubber, unwilling to let go. The days stretched into weeks and it never left. Driving home at dusk, I'd glance into the mirror and catch that shape again. A little clearer now, almost like a man, tall and narrow, limbs too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle as if listening to something I couldn't hear. At first it stayed at a distance, always in the far edge of my sight, but soon it began to creep closer. I'd switch lanes, pull into lit truck stops, sit for hours waiting, but the moment I was back on the highway it would return. My sleep grew ragged, haunted by the sound of slow footsteps pacing outside the walls. The smell of salt began to creep into my house, not sharp like the sea, but flat, bitter like old sweat dried into wood. No one else noticed, no one else smelled it, just me. By Christmas, I stopped driving that road. I begged co-workers to switch routes, made excuses to stay in town, but it didn't matter. Whatever I'd woken when I broke that line, it had already found me. One night, driving home from a friend's house far from the salt line, I saw it again. Not behind me this time. Not pacing my car. Standing on the roadside shoulder, leaning forward as though about to step into the lane, head cocked, mouth hanging open as if tasting the air. I swerved, nearly clipped a guardrail, and when I looked again, it was gone. I pulled into my drive shaking, swore I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. The end came late in January, the coldest week we'd had in years. I'd taken to sleeping with the TV on, the noise a shield against the silence. That night the screen went black on its own, though the power hadn't cut. The house went silent except for the sound of gravel crunching, steady, slow, moving from the drive to the porch, to the front step, to the door. I sat in the chair clutching the remote like a weapon, heart hammering so hard it drowned out the noise. Then the smell hit me, thick and choking, the salt stink filling every corner of the room. My eyes watered, my throat burned. I forced myself to move, to crawl to the window, and I saw it standing on the porch. Not a man, not really. Too thin, too tall. Its skin white and cracked like dried riverbed, its mouth stretching wide and dark, lined with something sharp and wet. Its hands rested against the doorframe, fingers long and splintered like driftwood. It leaned closer, pressing its face against the glass, and though the window should have been a barrier, the smell of salt rolled through the room in a suffocating wave. I remember backing away, tripping over the rug, hitting the floor hard. The last thing I saw was its mouth moving, though no sound came, only the faint hiss of salt pouring through cracks in the wood. And then there was nothing. No scream, no break, no chance to run. In the morning, my neighbors told the sheriff they saw my car still in the drive, lights on in the living room. But the house was empty. No sign of a struggle, no footprints in the gravel, no body, just salt. Thin white lines drawn across every doorway, every window, perfect and unbroken, sealing the house from the inside out. The gravel road cut off from the main highway without a sign. No name, no marker, just a dusty track of pale limestone breaking away from the asphalt like a scar. I had driven that stretch outside Giddings plenty of times, passing the same lonely gas station, the same weather-beaten barn with its tin roof rattling in the wind, and I swear that road had never been there before. It was late, near midnight. The black sky pressed down tight, and I had another 2 hours before home. I should have kept going, but headlights in the rear view had been tailing me for miles. High beams that never dimmed, staying close enough that I could feel the hum of their engine in my bones. When I saw the gravel road, I swung the wheel and took it without thinking, dust kicking up in a pale cloud behind me. The car that had been following never came after, and I should have felt relief. Instead, the moment my tires hit gravel, my own headlights flickered. Just once, just enough to notice. The silence was the next thing. Before that turn, the night had been full of sound. The buzz of cicadas, the croak of frogs, the whisper of wind through mesquite. Out there, you're never truly alone because Texas nights talk to you, full of small lives moving in the dark. But as I followed the narrow road, those sounds peeled away like something retreating. Even the hum of my engine felt quieter, smothered, like the world had gone soft and empty around me. The gravel crackled under my tires, but that was all. No wind, no insects, no life. Just the faint crunch and the beam of my headlights pushing forward between trees that hadn't been there before. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tight. The road was narrowing, the trees closing in, taller than they should have been. Pine where there shouldn't have been pine. Their trunks impossibly straight, their bark pale as bone in the headlights. I thought about turning around then, but when I checked my rear view, the highway was gone. The gravel ran back into a wall of trees, dense and black, and my stomach dropped because I hadn't driven that far. There should have been open field, the faint glow of the highway, a sky I recognized. Instead, there was nothing but those trunks pressed too close together. I told myself to keep going, that maybe this road cut back to the highway somewhere else. Maybe it was a logging road or an old county track that just didn't show up on the GPS. I pulled my phone from the console and saw the screen glow weak. Searching with no bars, battery draining faster than it should. By the time I set it back down, the battery was already at 20%, though it had been near full when I left town. The air felt colder too. I rolled the window a crack and felt it creep against my skin, damp and heavy like something breathed it onto me. The road bent left, then right, curves sharp enough that I had to slow nearly to a crawl. My lights caught movement ahead. A figure standing just beyond the bend, half hidden by the trees. At first I thought it was a deer, then maybe a person. I tapped the brakes and the figure stepped back, slipping out of the beam before I could make sense of it. The trees swallowed it whole. I sat there, engine idling, my own breath loud in my ears. I told myself I'd imagined it, but the smell of damp earth drifted in stronger, like the forest had shifted closer. I eased forward again, hands slick on the wheel. The road was rougher now, less gravel, more dirt with ruts that pulled at my tires. The trees leaned over me, their tops lost in the dark, branches stretched thin as fingers against the sky. I drove on for what felt like an hour, but the clock on the dash said only 12 minutes had passed. My lights caught something hanging from a branch. Cloth. A red flannel shirt torn through the middle, sleeves fluttering without wind. Below it, the dirt was churned up like someone had been dragged across it. I pressed the gas harder, telling myself not to stop, not to think about it. The road went on, unbroken, no side paths, no end. My headlights flickered again, dimmed to nothing, then roared back. In that breath of darkness, I heard something move against the car, a scrape along the driver's side door. Nails or metal dragging just once. I didn't look. I kept my eyes ahead, the road rising now, a low hill. At the top, I expected to see something. Maybe lights in the distance, but there was only more trees, more dirt road. My chest felt tight. I realized then what was wrong with the silence. It wasn't just that the forest was quiet. It was that I couldn't hear myself anymore. Not the thud of my heart, not the rush of blood in my ears. Just the engine, just the tires, as though the car were the only thing left alive. I slowed to a stop because the road ahead looked wrong. The trees bent toward each other, trunks arching into a kind of tunnel. Their bark shimmered pale, almost wet, and the dirt beneath looked soft like freshly dug earth. In the middle of the path, something waited. A shape. Not a person this time, not an animal. Just a mass shifting slightly like a sack breathing. My lights washed over it, and for an instant I thought I saw faces in it. Dozens of them. Pressed outward from beneath skin that wasn't theirs. Eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. The longer I looked, the clearer they became until I thought I recognized one. A boy I'd seen on a missing poster in the gas station weeks back. His eyes were wide, but his lips moved. Not words, just the shape of them. Run. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting dirt, and spun the wheel hard. But the road behind me was gone. Not trees this time. Not darkness. Just nothing. The beam of my reverse lights cut into a void, like the world had been swallowed up behind me. The car shuddered, engine whining, and for a heartbeat I thought I felt it tilt backward like gravity had slipped. I dropped it into drive and shot forward, straight into the tunnel of trees. Branches clawed at the roof, snapped against the glass. The shape in the road split apart as I drove through it. Faces stretching, tearing, mouths opening wider in silence. My tires sank into the dirt deeper than they should, pulling like hands clutching from below. I floored the gas. The car screamed, the tunnel collapsed in on itself, and everything went black. When the lights came back, I was parked on the shoulder of the highway. Engine off. Keys still in the ignition, my hands frozen on the wheel. The gravel road was gone, no trace of it. Just a barbed wire fence and a field stretching into darkness. My phone was dead, screen black, though I swear I never saw the battery drain the last of the way. I sat there until the first set of headlights passed on the highway. Another truck headed east. I wanted to flag them down, to ask if they'd ever seen a gravel road here, but when I looked back, there were scratches along my driver's side door. Long parallel, too deep for branches. I drove the rest of the way home without the radio, without the windows down. I never told anyone about it, not really, not in full. But sometimes when I drive past that stretch, I think I see something in the corner of my eye, just beyond the reach of the highway lights. Not a road, not a path. Just the suggestion of one waiting for me to take it again. Do you want me to push this story even darker? With an ending that makes it clear the narrator didn't truly escape, or keep it lingering and ambiguous like this? Highway 87 cuts through miles of mesquite and cedar, the kind of Texas stretch where radio stations fade to static and headlights only find asphalt, fence posts, and the occasional jackrabbit darting across the road. It was on that highway, 3 miles past a lonely service station outside Eden, that the deer first appeared. A buck, lean-bodied with a rack of antlers like crooked branches, sprawled across the shoulder with its legs twisted unnaturally, chest torn open as if a truck had gutted it at 60 miles per hour. The first night people slowed, drivers rubbernecking at the carcass, some swearing they saw the eyes glint like glass catching light. But it wasn't the usual way roadkill reflects. It seemed active, deliberate, like the deer was watching. By morning, locals expected the county cleanup crew to haul it off. Roadkill never lasts long in Texas heat. Coyotes drag it into the brush, buzzards strip it to bones, storms scatter what's left. But when the sun rose, the deer was still there. Not bloated, not stiffened, not crawling with flies. The wound across its chest gaped red as if freshly struck. For days, then weeks, it stayed like that. Whole, untouched. Always in the same position, as though frozen in the moment of impact. Truckers started warning each other over CB radio. Don't look at it, some said. Keep your high beams low, don't let its eyes catch you. Stories spread, the kind that roost in towns like Eden and grow teeth. A schoolteacher swore she saw its head lift slightly as she passed, the antlers tilting toward her car. A ranch hand claimed he hit it again by accident, felt the sickening thump of tire over flesh, but when he stopped and checked, his bumper was clean and the deer unmarked. A couple driving home from San Angelo one night said it was lying on the center line instead of the shoulder. But by morning it was back where it had been, pristine. The sheriff chalked it up to hysteria. He ordered a deputy to bag it and haul it to the dump. The deputy returned pale-faced, said the deer wasn't there when he got to the spot, though an hour later it was back, same as before. Another deputy tried shooting it, put 2 rounds into its skull. Folks heard the shots echoing across the empty fields, yet when they drove by later, the deer's eyes were still open, still fixed toward the asphalt, its head unmarred. Curiosity drove some teenagers to pull over one humid night. They parked on the shoulder, headlights aimed at the body. They sat there smoking, daring each other to get closer. One boy finally stepped out, swore at his friends that it was just a deer, just meat. He kicked the body. It was solid, warm, and a faint tremor moved through it like breath. The others said he went pale, muttered something about its chest moving. They peeled out in a panic, gravel spitting, but one of them swore the deer's eyes turned to follow as they fled. A week later, that same boy's pickup was found flipped in a ditch 30 miles down 87. No skid marks, no sign of braking. His body was inside, neck broken, eyes wide open. By then, the deer had become something more than a roadside oddity. Long-haul drivers rerouted to avoid that stretch. Locals took county back roads. The gas station owner near mile marker 243 started losing business. He told anyone who'd listened that he saw the deer standing once. Just standing, perfectly upright in the rain, then lying back down in the same position as before. He stopped saying it after his daughter woke up screaming one night, insisting she'd heard antlers scraping her bedroom window. The strange part wasn't only that the deer didn't rot. It was the way people swore it seemed closer every time they passed. A little further toward the lane. A little more turned toward them. One woman said it lay square across the yellow line when she approached, but when she slowed, it slid without moving its legs, back to its usual place on the shoulder, as though the road itself had repositioned it. She refused to drive at night after that. The sheriff finally sent word to the county morgue. He wanted proof. 2 men came out with gloves and gurneys, determined to haul the thing off. They worked in silence under the hazy orange glow of floodlights, strapping it down. Witnesses say the deer's eyes shone wet in the artificial light. The men lifted it, muscles straining, but halfway to the truck, the straps loosened. The carcass hit the ground with a crack like a snapped branch. They dropped everything and bolted, swearing the deer's legs twitched, that it rolled slightly toward the road on its own. By dawn, it was back in the same position. No sign of straps, no marks in the dirt. That was the last attempt anyone made to move it. After that, the county let it be. Drivers still whisper about it on lonely nights. If you stop and listen near mile 243, some say you can hear the faint sound of antlers dragging across the pavement, though nothing stirs the mesquite. They say the air smells like wet copper, even in dry heat, and if you sit long enough, you'll swear its chest rises once, then falls. Some people have followed its gaze, traced where the eyes point, only to find headlights in the distance, cars that never arrive. The strangest thing is what happens to the ones who linger too long. They start hearing it on back roads, seeing flashes of a rack of antlers in their rearview mirrors, catching the stench of blood even when nowhere near Eden. A man who pulled over to watch it one night never came home. His wife said he called her, voice trembling, whispering that the deer had gotten up. She listened to silence for 10 minutes before the line went dead. They found his car doors open, engine running, headlights pointed into the brush. But he was gone, and the deer was back in its place on the shoulder, eyes gleaming under the moon. The roadkill doesn't rot, it waits, always in the same spot, patient as stone. though travelers swear it grows just a little larger each time. And sometimes, when the storms roll heavy across the plains and lightning flashes white against the asphalt, they say they see antlers not just on the ground, but stretching high in the fields, a whole herd standing silent in the rain, watching with eyes that never blink. Highway 67 stretched out before Darren like a black ribbon unwinding into nowhere, its cracked asphalt shimmering under the weight of late summer heat. He was used to the monotony of these drives between Dallas and San Angelo, the endless flat scrubland, the scattered gas stations with flickering neon signs, the radio going in and out until static swallowed whole songs. Tonight felt different, though, as if the air itself carried a charge that made his skin itch. He was tired, headlights carving tunnels through the dark, and he realized with irritation that his phone battery had plummeted from 60% to 0 in less than a minute. Dead. Not just low power mode or a glitch, but the kind of death where pressing the button gave nothing at all. He cursed under his breath and tossed it onto the passenger seat, watching the black screen tilt like an eye gone blind. 2 miles later, he noticed something strange. Another car ahead of him had slowed to the shoulder, hazards clicking weakly. Darren pulled closer and saw the driver standing outside with his phone in hand, shaking it as if willing it back to life. The man caught Darren's headlights, turned, and his face looked pale, stricken. Darren thought about stopping, but didn't. Something about the man's posture, the way he stared at the phone like it had betrayed him, sent a cold pulse through Darren's gut. He pressed the accelerator and sped past, leaving the stranger in his rear view. At mile marker 223, his dashboard clock flickered. The radio coughed into static. Then, impossibly, the dead phone on his seat lit up with a cold blue glow. The screen showed not his lock screen or an app, but a blurred image that sharpened into a face pressed against glass. Lips peeled back in a soundless scream. His blood froze. He recognized the voice it mimed. It was his own. The scream silent but unmistakably his throat, his mouth, his eyes wide with terror. He swerved onto the rumble strip before forcing himself back into the lane. The screen blinked black again. The phone was dead, just as it had been. He kept driving, gripping the wheel so tight the tendons in his hands throbbed. He told himself he was tired, hallucinating, maybe micro-sleeping behind the wheel. But as the highway unrolled mile after mile, his eyes kept flicking to the phone. Once more it lit. A new image. His reflection twisted and smeared as though underwater, his face dragging down like it was melting. The silent mouth moved, screaming without sound. He snapped his eyes away and forced himself not to look, but he could feel the glow against his skin. Unnatural, cold. A gas station appeared like an oasis in the dark. Darren pulled in, heart hammering. The lights buzzed overhead, but the lot was empty except for a single pickup, parked crooked by the ice machine. Inside, the clerk, a young woman with bleached hair and tired eyes, looked up as he stumbled in. She asked if he was all right. He realized he must have looked shaken, pale as the man he'd passed earlier. Darren tried to laugh it off, said his phone had died. Her face changed. She asked where. When he said around mile marker 223, she dropped her gaze and muttered, "They always do." He asked what she meant, but she wouldn't elaborate. Just rang up his coffee and handed back change without meeting his eyes. He noticed a trembling in her hands. Back in the car, he hesitated to turn it on. The phone still sat on the passenger seat, lifeless black. He picked it up and pressed the button. Nothing. He decided to leave it off, threw it into the glove compartment, slammed it shut. He told himself not to think about faces on glass, not to imagine the silent screams. He pulled back onto the highway, determined to get as far as he could before exhaustion won. But the miles dragged him deeper. The road narrowed, shoulders eroded into dark grass. He noticed another vehicle stopped ahead. This time a minivan, hazards clicking. A woman knelt by the door, her phone in the dirt, lit with that same eerie glow. He slowed without meaning to, eyes drawn. The screen showed a distorted face pressed to glass. Hers. She sobbed and backed away from it. Darren hit the gas, heart racing, but in his mirrors he saw her still kneeling there, the blue glow staining her face. The air grew heavier like static before a storm. Every few miles he saw them, lone drivers stranded at the same marker, their phones drained yet alive in moments, forcing their owners to watch themselves scream. Some wept, some stared blankly, some flailed their arms at passing cars. No one stopped. Darren understood why. Whatever this was, it wasn't something you could help. It wasn't something you could share. It was an intrusion, a message written in their own voices, their own terror. Hours later, or what felt like hours, he realized he hadn't seen another working car in some time. Only those stopped, caught. His dashboard clock had frozen at 2:17. His headlights seemed weaker, eaten by the dark. And when his glove compartment rattled, his chest locked up. The phone inside was buzzing. Though he knew its battery had been dead, it pulsed like a trapped insect. He pulled over, sweating, hands trembling. He reached out slowly and opened the compartment. The glow spilled out, cold blue again. The phone lay there, screen lit, and for the first time sound came through. A thin, rasping scream that rose in pitch until it felt like it was drilling into his skull. And yes, it was his voice. Not just a scream, but words now. Words begging him to stop, to get out of the car, to run while he still could. The face pressed against the glass mouthed them too. Eyes bloodshot, veins standing out against the skin. It was him, but broken, already half gone. Darren dropped the phone. It clattered to the floorboard, but the scream didn't stop. He covered his ears, slammed his eyes shut. When he opened them, the windshield was fogged from the inside. Shapes pressed against it. Hands, faces, dozens of them, all screaming without sound. The silence heavier than noise. Some were strangers. Some he recognized. The woman from the minivan, the man from the shoulder. And among them, his own reflection stared back at him, mouth wide, eyes wild. The car was filled with the stink of hot breath, though no one was inside. Just him. Just the phone shrieking in his own voice. He bolted out into the highway night, stumbling on cracked pavement, choking on the dry air. The car behind him stood with its headlights pointed nowhere, the windshield already misted with the shapes of trapped faces. He ran down the road, but each marker he passed carried the same weight. The glow followed him, not from his pocket, not from his car, but from the very dark itself. He could feel it on his skin. At mile marker 229, he collapsed, too tired to move. He felt the phone heavy in his pocket, though he swore he'd left it in the car. It buzzed once, then again, then screamed. He pulled it out and saw himself staring back, blood dripping from his nose, his lips mouthing words he didn't want to read. The screen flickered, and in the reflection of the black glass, he saw a crowd gathered around him in the middle of that desolate Texas highway. Silent, endless, their faces pressed too close, their eyes mirrors of his own. And when his throat finally tore open with the scream he had seen a dozen times over, he knew they had been waiting for him all along. The first time I heard it was on a night when the air felt like it had been soaked in rust and motor oil. The kind of night you only get in the deep heart of Texas when the wind drops and the crickets stop singing. I had been driving south on Highway 287, somewhere between Wichita Falls and a town so small the highway markers didn't even bother naming it. My radio was a piece of junk, the kind of aftermarket unit that hums even when it's off. But it gave me something to fill the silence. Only that night the FM stations were just hiss and the AM side was nothing but ghost talk, snippets of sermons and preachers shouting into the void. I was tired, eyes raw from the road, and for no reason I can explain, I twisted the dial past the lowest number just to see what would happen. At first it was nothing but the static you'd expect, white noise rushing in like a broken faucet. Then under it something that prickled the skin at the back of my neck. Voices, but wrong somehow. They were singing what sounded like church hymns, but the words were reversed, warped like a tape being spun backwards. The melody was still there though, faint and mournful. The kind of thing you'd hear when you walked past a cemetery at midnight and swore you heard somebody humming under the soil. I thought I was just exhausted, brain playing tricks until the music cut out sharp like scissors snipping a thread. What came next was a man's voice, flat and unhurried, like he was reading scores at a baseball game. He announced a time, a place, and then described an accident, a pickup colliding with a semi just north of Decatur. 2 fatalities. A boy in the back seat thrown clear, alive but broken. My blood ran cold because I had driven that stretch of road enough times to picture it. Every cracked billboard and busted fence post. I remember thinking, this has to be some pirate station. Some sick joke broadcast out of a shack by some lunatic with too much whiskey and an old transmitter. I turned the dial up past it, but the station was still there, stronger now, as if the car itself wanted me to hear. I tried to shake it off, but the next day, over coffee at a truck stop in Bowie, I heard 2 men talking. Their voices were low, serious. A wreck up near Decatur, a pickup and a semi, 2 dead. A boy airlifted out, busted up but alive. The details matched down to the splinter. I felt my stomach turn to ice water. I didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say? That I'd heard about it last night from a phantom radio station that shouldn't exist? For weeks after, I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. Nights on the road, when the loneliness pressed down too heavy, I'd spin the dial low again, and always it was there. Always the hymns first, backwards and warped, then the announcements. They were never vague. A woman stepping off the curb in Fort Worth run down by a delivery van, a house fire out near Mineral Wells, 3 trapped inside, a suicide in a motel near Waco, the sound of the gun echoing off the cheap plaster walls. I stopped listening to music. I stopped making phone calls. The world of the living felt thinner than tissue paper compared to that voice, to the certainty in it. And every time the accidents happened, they made the news, or people talked in diners, or I saw the flashing lights myself as I drove by, blood already drying on asphalt that had been named hours earlier by the man on the radio. I tried to warn someone once. I remember it clear. The voice said there would be a bus crash outside Gainesville, around 2 in the morning, brakes failing on a curve. I pulled into the county sheriff's office, wild-eyed, told the deputy what I'd heard. He looked at me like I'd just pissed on the floor. Asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't, but I couldn't prove it. When the crash happened, just like the voice said, no one came looking for me. No one ever did. After a while, the station started changing. The hymns got louder, closer, and the words weren't backwards anymore. I could hear them plain, though they weren't like any hymn I'd ever sung in church. They were about rivers of fire, about skin peeling like bark from trees, about doors that opened under the earth and never closed again. The voice changed too. Still flat, still calm, but heavier. Like the man speaking was sitting closer to the microphone, breathing just enough that I could hear it. Then it started naming me. Not just me, but my truck, my routes, the places I stopped. One night it said a man in a red Dodge Ram would fall asleep at the wheel outside Henrietta and roll into a ditch, crushed under his own rig. I drive a red Dodge Ram. I had just passed through Henrietta. I pulled over on the shoulder and sat there shaking, hands gripping the wheel until they cramped. I didn't sleep that night, didn't drive either. But the next day I heard about it anyway. Another man in a red Dodge hauling lumber went off the road in the dark and died trapped in the cab. That was when I understood. The station didn't just predict. It offered up possibilities, and if I tried to dodge them, it found another poor bastard to take my place. Like a hunger that didn't care where the meat came from, only that it was fed. Now it's worse. I can't turn it off anymore. Even with the radio yanked clean out of the dash, I hear it, low and steady, coming from the vents, from the tires on the road, from the hum of the engine itself. Hymns first, then the voice. Last night it told me something I haven't been able to shake. It named me again. Said my name plain as a church bell. Said I would stop at a rest area outside Vernon. That someone would come to my window knocking and that I should not open the door, not under any circumstance. Because if I did, I wouldn't ever be driving away again. I'm parked there now. The lot is empty. The lamps buzzing and spitting insects against their glow. The highway is quiet. But every so often I see headlights crest the hill and slide past like ghosts. I can hear it under the noise of the cicadas. The hymns are louder, clear as a choir now, and the voice is patient, waiting for me to listen. There it is. A knock on the glass, soft, polite, just the way the voice said it would be. And I don't know how long I can keep pretending I won't answer. The rusted green sign leaned at an angle, half hidden by weeds. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't already tired and squinting through the haze of a long Texas night. It sat there on the shoulder of Highway 183, paint flaking like old skin, with the words Exit 11 stenciled across it in faded white. Below that, someone had once spray-painted an arrow that pointed toward the ramp itself. But the color had run down like dried blood after years of rain and heat. Most nights it was nothing, just another forgotten road marker in a state littered with them. But for the truckers who drove that stretch too often, and for the locals in the little towns east of Llano, it had taken on a different weight. They told stories in bars, in the corners of gas stations late at night. Don't take Exit 11, they'd say, not unless you don't mind never coming back. Clay hadn't heard those stories. He was 3 hours into a drive from Abilene to Austin, running on bad coffee and the kind of exhaustion that gnaws at your focus until the lines in the road start to blur. He was thinking about his ex-wife, about the job interview waiting for him in the morning, about how his truck's air conditioning had given out again. When the sign came up, his headlights picked out the green and white and the shadow of that arrow. He thought nothing of it. Just another off-ramp. Just another chance to shave a few minutes off the ride if it led to a smaller road. He flicked on his blinker and turned onto the ramp. The asphalt curved gently at first, nothing strange about it. Clay leaned into it, one hand on the wheel, the other nursing the styrofoam cup he'd refilled at a Love's station back up the road. But then the curve tightened. Not sharp, not enough to make him slam the brakes, but tighter than he expected. His headlights slid across the thick black silhouettes of trees packed close together on either side, trunks crowding up against the guardrail. He adjusted, steering into the turn, and realized he hadn't seen a merge lane yet. No sign of another highway, just the curve pulling him along. He drove for another 30 seconds, maybe a minute, before it registered that the ramp hadn't ended. It should have fed him onto another stretch of road by now, or at least straightened out, but it kept curling inward like it was winding around some invisible center. He muttered, "What the hell," under his breath and pressed harder on the gas, trying to push through it. The headlights lit up more trees, more guardrail, more asphalt banking slightly under his tires. The ramp was looping tighter like a spiral. The lines on the road were cracked and uneven, paint flaking like the sign had, and the deeper he went, the darker the trees seemed to grow. The air felt thicker too, humid in a way that didn't match the cool desert breeze he'd had on the highway. His windshield fogged, and when he wiped it with the back of his hand, the streaks didn't clear. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. The glowing green digits read 12:42. When he looked back again a minute later, it still read 12:42. He tapped the glass like that would shake it loose, but the numbers didn't move. The truck's engine whined higher as he pushed the pedal down. The ramp refused to release him. It turned and turned until it felt like he'd been circling for hours. He slowed finally, pulled to the shoulder, and killed the headlights just to break the monotony. That was when he realized there was no shoulder. He'd stopped in the middle of the lane, and behind him was nothing but more ramp curving off into the dark. He twisted the rearview mirror to see farther, but it only reflected blackness like the lights couldn't touch what was behind him. He rolled down the window. The trees pressed close, their branches knotting over each other, black against black. The air smelled sour, damp earth, and something chemical like burnt rubber. A faint sound came with it too, something between a hum and a whisper, low and constant, rising and falling in waves. He thought it was his own engine at first, but the key was out of the ignition. Clay tried the door. The handle stuck like it hadn't been moved in years, but he forced it open and stepped out. The ramp under his boots was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, weeds pushing up through the seams. He crouched, ran his fingers over the asphalt. It was warm, too warm, almost hot, as if it had been sitting in the noon sun all day instead of the cool night. He looked back toward the truck, expecting the glow of taillights, but they weren't on. In fact, the truck itself looked different. The paint on the side panels had bubbled as if the metal had been left out in fire. The tires sagged, melting into the road. His mouth went dry. He whispered, "No, no, no," and climbed back in, slamming the door. The key turned, but the engine coughed like an old smoker and gave nothing. He tried again, until his palm hurt from twisting. Nothing. He gripped the wheel, heart pounding, and stared forward. The ramp curved ahead, patient, waiting. Against every instinct, he put the truck in neutral and let it roll. The wheels shuddered against the pavement, and the sound of that humming whisper rose. He thought he heard words this time, just beneath the surface. His name, maybe. His ex-wife's voice. His father's laugh from 20 years ago. All bleeding together like voices down a long hallway. The ramp narrowed as he rolled on, the guardrails squeezing closer. The trees arched overhead now, a tunnel of tangled limbs. The asphalt cracked wider, gaps yawning between slabs of road, and in those gaps there was no dirt, no gravel, just empty black space like a drop-off into nothing. Clay gripped the wheel harder, even though the truck wasn't steering itself anymore, and felt sweat crawl down his spine. He tried the brakes once, gently. They sank to the floor without resistance. The ramp had him. The whisper grew louder, rising in pitch until it was almost a scream, though still soft, still impossible to block out. The clock on the dash blinked 12:42, 12:42, 12:42 in time with it. The spiral turned tighter. He leaned forward, straining to see what was at the center, some exit, some release. His headlights flickered back on without him touching the switch, washing the curve ahead in a sickly yellow glow. For one moment, he thought he saw the end. A wide circle of open asphalt. But in the middle of that circle was nothing. A hole perfectly round, swallowing the light. The ramp funneled straight into it. He had just enough time to scream before the truck tipped forward. The hole opened wider, impossibly wide, until there was no ramp, no trees, no sky. Only the endless black swallowing him whole, his voice ripped away. The clock frozen forever at 12:42. And on the highway above, the rusted green sign still leaned, the arrow still pointing, waiting for the next tired driver to pass by and wonder where that old ramp might lead. They call it the frozen mile like it was a joke. The way you nickname the mean dog in the yard Sweet Pea to stop yourself from looking it in the eye. Folks around Childress and Clarendon say the phrase with a little throwaway chuckle. Like they are locals and therefore immune. Like locals ever are. The mile sits on US 287 just past a wind-polished rise where the grass turns thin and the mesquite pretends to be a tree. It does not matter if it is early August and the asphalt elsewhere is melting into shoes. For that mile, the air comes down sharp and white and your breath fogs when you talk, and the road makes a skin of ice that is thin and clear, like frost on a freezer door, except when you try to scrape it with your boot it laughs and makes no sound at all. I drive a wrecker out of Childress. I know the color of deer eyes at 2 in the morning and the way oil smells when it leaks after a roll. Most nights are tires and drunks and the occasional cow standing where God never intended a cow to stand. That night, the thermometer on my dash read 97 as I climbed out past Memphis under a sun that felt personal. The radio played Static and then a preacher out of Wheeler. I had a thermos of coffee that had gone sour in the heat. The day was sticky and endless until the road tipped down. The fence posts took on a brief tilt, and I saw the shimmer that is not heat like a bad mirage but cold. Blue at the edges. I do not know when I first heard about the breath. It is something people add as a garnish when they tell you about the frozen mile. Those who slide off are never found, they say, but their breath still fogs the glass of passing cars. They tell it with a grin, but then they glance quick at their own windshield like maybe they have already been marked. The first time I felt it, I was 26 and new to the wrecker. I drove my boss's old Ford with the manual winch, cranked my window down to spit, and when I breathed in, it fogged. The glass made a squirming pattern, not a patch, like something had leaned in from the outside and exhaled through its teeth. I wiped it with the back of my hand and it left a frost rim that made my knuckles ache when I touched it. People go off there. Not every week. Not enough to bring the state down with guardrails and reconstruction money. Enough to make a pattern in the kind of ledger you keep in your head. You think that Corolla that never showed. That Suburban with the church decal, that rancher in a dually whose wife is still making calls to this day, as if the phone will answer itself. You think traffic cameras ought to catch something. Except that mile sits in a wireless shrug of land where signals thin to nothing. You think, the ditch should show scuffs, tracks, the scar of a bumper. It does not. It is the part that makes a man like me itch. I'm a practical man. I think in metal and leverage. A car goes off the road and it goes somewhere. It does not simply quit. When it took Lorna, the part of me that was practical and the part that was human both dug in their heels. She was driving back from Amarillo in May. A weekday with sky like a clean sheet. She had eaten an orange in the car, she told me by text, juice sticky on her fingers, and she had bought a succulent at a garden center we could not keep alive. Then nothing. I did not think the mile. I thought blowout or an odd stop to admire a cliff swallow under a bridge. I thought she had called her sister in Lubbock and gone to see her, the way she did sometimes when the house felt small and her job nagged. I took the wrecker anyway because it is what I had. And because there had been a time in our marriage when showing up in the one machine I controlled had been how I fixed things. When I came over that rise, I could see the state trucks parked a safe distance back with lights rotating lazily. I could see a trooper named Maria, who had once stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours when my son was in the hospital in Wichita Falls. She had a face that made you believe in rules. She had it set in a shape I had never seen on her before. I parked where she told me, well out of the mile, chains clanking. And when I stepped down, the heat went away as if the wind had an on-off switch. Cold came up through my boots. My breath fogged the mirror, and then as I straightened, the glass of the spotlight on my boom. "Do you see that?" Maria said, as if she needed me to say yes so she would not be the only witness to the stupid impossible. We walked the shoulder. There were no tracks. The ice gleamed hard and clean under an invisible film of water like breath caught and pooled. Lorna's last ping put her in this stretch. Her car was blue. A Camry with a dent in the rear bumper where I had backed into it with the mower. There was not a single piece of it here. The ditch was dry and cracked and full of burrs. On the far side of the right-of-way, mesquite and prickly pear went on for a long afternoon's walk. We went for that walk, sweating in our coats because you put one on without thinking when the air hurts you in May. We circled and circled. The talk turned quiet. Then the talk stopped. The heat resumed in a line you could step across like a courtroom threshold. And in the rearview mirror of my truck, I watched myself exhale clouds. You lose a person one of two ways in this part of the country. The kind where your whole body knows it, and the kind where nothing is sure, and you are consigned to spend the rest of your life telling people that she might walk in any minute. The second kind is a slow saw. You hear it in the night and you go downstairs and make coffee like coffee can still a blade. You drive the mile every day. You make a fool of yourself with county engineers, asking about ground temperature anomalies and strange subterranean flows. You sit in the diner in Childress and listen to old men talk about the courthouse school consolidation, and you wait for one to say something that is not about football. Eventually one does. He is 90 if he is a day, and he wears a cap that says Korean War. And he tells you about a winter in the 50s when the county borrowed a salt truck from Amarillo, and the salt piled up in a neat white bank on that mile and nothing happened to it. The next morning it was still there like sugar on a countertop left after a party. He says the state tried coarse sand. He says they put down pea gravel. The mile shrugged it off. He says the first time he saw breath on the glass, he was coming back from a dance in Clarendon in his daddy's DeSoto, and he thought he was a man, and then he cried. I started carrying a little temperature gun in the wrecker. The mile reads 9, 10, 12 degrees colder than the approach, never the same number, always enough to hurt your fingers. I drove it so often the cold got into the truck and lived there like a tenant who never paid. I started seeing the breath patterns more clearly. They were not random clouds. They were lines and oval swirls, as if lips were being pressed right up to the glass. Sometimes they were small, sometimes large, sometimes a confusion of many. I once pulled to the shoulder where there are no tracks and the fog appeared not in front, but in my side mirror. And when I turned my head, the passenger window clouded in a shape that could have been a hand. 5 rounded loops within a larger bloom. I wiped it with my sleeve, and for a second the frost flash burned the imprint of someone's knuckles into my skin. Like at the old carnival when you stick your arm into a bucket of dry ice for a dare and come away with marks you pretend not to feel. About a month after Lorna, a cattle hauler vanished. Big rig, white cab. He had called his wife 3 times from Shamrock to the mile. The last call was all engine noise and a sentence that sounded like the name of a child you could not quite catch. Maria and I stood again with our hands on the hips where we keep our strength, staring at a ditch that could not swallow that much steel. We looked at the sky because it felt like something up there had to be watching. We did not see a bird. Not a single buzzard. The cold did not belong to the air. It belonged to something that made the air its messenger. There are stories about how it started. An inmate bus went off in a snowstorm in 1970, and the state buried the bodies to avoid a scandal. A medicine man cursed the section crew that cut through a burial ground. A Baptist church staged a mass baptism in winter, and the water took more than it should. A surveyor from back before the road was paved wrote in his notebook that cattle avoided that section and stamped it bitter draw with a little cross in the margin. A rancher swears an underground spring runs there that comes from a lake up north and freezes anything it touches in August because of a chemical that makes sense to men who keep fertilizer in their sheds. There is always a story. I told them all to my son Mark, who came up from Abilene to sit on my couch and watch me move around the house with my hands half clenched. He had Lorna's patience. He had my eyes. He had a wife who did not like me, not that it mattered. He ate the food people had brought and looked at me like if he stared long enough, I would tell him the one thing that mattered, which was where his mother was. We drove out to the mile right before dawn when the sky was pale, and all the light was coming in at an angle. He wore my spare coat and he wrote the letters of his name with his breath on the inside of the window like a boy, the outside fogged by itself, and the letters blurred in sympathy until it looked like a person trying to copy a signature in the wrong hand. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was the way the mile had started to feel like a door that was standing ajar with cold leaking around its frame. I started to think about leverage. I bought a length of chain heavy enough you feel it in your shoulders when you lift it wrong. I asked around at the yard for old anchors off junked oil field equipment. I welded brackets on the hitch of the wrecker that would hold if you used them to pull up a post oak. You would have thought I was building a trap for something out in the pasture, which I guess I was. Except the thing was not an animal and it did not live in a place you could point to on a map. Maria called me one night and said I should not tell you this. But I was out there alone for an hour while the county camera set up, and I saw a reflection slide across my windshield that looked like a man's face leaning in to ask for directions. She said it moved wrong. She said it came from the glass out instead of from the outside in. She said it had no eyes to focus on, just a suggestion of them. Like steam can draw a shape if your mind is primed for it. She said, "You need to stop." I said, "I will stop when the road starts behaving like a road." She made a sound I had never heard her make. It was small. It made me think of the nightshade of a woman's hair on a pillow. She said, "I know you will not stop, so take this." She gave me a spool of bright orange line from a search and rescue kit that was supposed to be untangleable. I waited for a night that burned hot everywhere else. Moths battered themselves stupid against the floodlights at the yard. The wrecker ticked as the motor cooled, and then I woke it back up and pointed it north. I did not love my plan. I did not even like it. The point of the plan was that it was the only thing left to do. I pulled up a few hundred yards shy of the mile and walked out with the anchor swaying like a bell from my hand and the orange line coiled over my shoulder. I hammered a stake into the ground as deep as it would go and tied off the line. With knots I had learned from a man who tied boats for a living. On Lake Kemp, I hooked the wrecker to the stake with chain so that, if the line somehow could not carry the weight of me, the truck would. It was a belt and suspenders arrangement for a universe with no pants. It was almost funny how quickly the air bit. My breath plumed. The grass around my boots crystallized at the tips like someone had sugared it. I took a step onto the road and felt nothing under the sole, which is wrong. You should feel the texture of the aggregate in the asphalt. I felt a smooth coolness that gave not at all, and then, a foot out, a little slickness like I had stepped on a fish. I went to my knees like an old man, and my jeans picked up frost in a gray bloom. I leaned over the bar ditch, and the ditch was a ditch, and then it was not. It was a darker gray, a deepening. It was the color the lake takes when the wind stops. I heard nothing from the highway behind me, and nothing from the night ahead, and the sound of my own heart coming through my ears like someone knocking to be let out. I pushed my hand into the darkness above the ditch, and it went cold in a way hands should not. It went numb to the wrist and then to the elbow. I jerked back and watched a little curl of fog trail from my fingers and hang in the air like smoke, and then drift toward the glass of my truck like it had a destination. The orange line trembled through my gloves. It did not creak like normal rope. It hummed like a tuning fork if you set it against a bone. I leaned in again. You think you will recognize the moment when you step over. You think there will be a line. There was no line. There was a feeling that the gravity of the earth had turned to point somewhere that was not down. My boots slid. The line paid out as if a hand had taken it and was guiding it out over a smooth rail. I felt the subtle give of slack and then a tug upward that made my shoulders rise like the string of a puppet. I was not falling so much as being drawn. The ditch widened. The cold hit my teeth. The world narrowed until all it contained was the pale oval of my breath and the more complicated breath that came toward it like a lover closing. I do not know if I cried out. If I did, the sound snapped off and fell at my feet and froze there with the frost like a broken key. The line went taut. I could feel the anchor in the ground behind me straining. The truck shifted an inch on its springs. The chain clanked once. The pull ahead grew gentle. That is how it got me. It was not a rip or a jerk. It was the pressure of someone's hand between my shoulder blades that easy, friendly steermen give one another when they are showing you where the beer is. Step there, the pressure said. Right there, the road went away. I was not in water. I was in something that received me the way a mouth receives a breath. I expected panic. I got a layer of quiet like a blanket. I got a sense of distance becoming irrelevant. I got a taste in the back of my throat like copper pennies tapped against a tooth. Faces came in and away, not as shapes with hard lines, but as differences in temperature that suggested features. You know how your own breath fogs a mirror and for a second you can make your mouth a circle or a line and watch it? It was that, but not mine. Many. In front of me, a small one like a child's, and behind it a large one that leaned in as if to shelter or to threaten. I could not tell. My fingers had stopped obeying my orders by then, which was a relief. I am a man whose hands have done every job he ever had. It felt like rest to have them taken from me for a minute. The first voice did not come through ears. It came like the sensation of reading words behind your eyes. We are not lost, it said. There was no comfort in it. It was a simple claim, a statement of geography. The second voice came softer from the left. They think we are gone. It wanted me to argue. It wanted me to say I think otherwise. I said nothing. The third was Lorna. I do not mean a voice that sounded like her. I mean the particular tilt of the way she said my name when she was irritated with me for losing the keys, and when she was grateful to me for taking out the trash, and when she wanted me to come to bed, Clay had said. And the line no longer hummed but sang like wire and wind. I have said I do not believe in much beyond metal and leverage. That is still largely true. But what I tell you now would be a lie if I dressed it up as mechanics. I felt her press against me, not with an arm and not with a mouth, but with a force I recognized from the years we had made a life. This, the pressure said, this is the way. I remembered things I had no right to remember in that place. Her working a splinter out of my palm with a needle and making me bite down on a dish towel while she did it. Her loading groceries in the trunk and setting the bread gently aside so it would not get crushed. Her laughing in the driveway at a joke our son had made. Picking up a baseball cap the wind had taken without breaking stride. All of it came right there to the edge where I had no edges anymore. A fourth voice spoke that had the exact flat certainty of Maria when she was in uniform. Stop, it said. I could not place the source because in there sources did not match to directions anymore. But it was hers. It had cut through things before. It cut through this. My hands found my hands again. The orange line burned a little against my glove where it had frosted up and then melted with whatever heat I had left in me. I pulled. It did not feel like a pull. It felt like someone had granted me a wish I did not know to ask for. I fell backward in stages, one joint at a time, like the rungs of a ladder. My heels hit road. My knees hit gravel. My hip met the edge of the ditch, and the bruise later would be the size of a dinner plate. The night returned in its old shape. The sound of insects came like applause. The cold drew itself back as if embarrassed at being seen. I lay there staring up where the stars have been spread by hand across the panhandle since before we knew to ask who did it, and I did not think anything for a good while. My breath was my breath again, stupid and warm. It fogged nothing. It went nowhere. It was ordinary. I did not tell anyone the part about the voices for a week. When I did, I told Maria with the engine running in case she laughed and walked away. She did not laugh. She did not say anything for a minute. Then she said, I went in 2 nights ago. She held up her forearm. The skin had the map of frost burns on it, pale arcs where something had leaned. She said, I heard my grandmother. She said she was dead in Merkel when I was 5. She told me to stop halfway down. Then she said I smelled the soap from her house. I did not know to make of that any more than I knew what to make of my own little visions. It felt like the kind of thing that belonged in a story on the radio told by a man with a slow voice, not in my wrecker with the ashtray always full. It would be convenient for story purposes to end there. That is not where it ends. The mile did not close. The county did not reroute. Men in tan uniforms put up 2 lighted warning signs that blink polar conditions in July, and people take pictures of them for social media and get their likes. Sometimes the signs fog as if they are breathing, and people say that is moisture in the casing. As if that answers anything. I kept going back because I'm not made of the stuff it takes to look away, and because Lorna had put her hand on me in a place where hands do not work and pointed. Things got worse in a way that only makes sense if you have stood by a lake and felt it receive a thrown rock without caring. Cars kept disappearing. The ditch remained the same certain stupid ditch it had always been, full of burrs and snakes. One evening a school bus slowed to a stop at the end of the mile, and the children inside made little hearts on the fog and laughed, because they were 9 and the world was a trick that adults play for them. The driver called the transportation office and a woman came in a Suburban to look, and she stood and then put out her hand toward the glass of the bus and let it cool her palm. That night she went home and did not sleep and drove back at 2 and walked into the mile alone and never came out. Her husband found her car the next morning, idling and warm as bread, parked where the air turns. Her breath fogged the glass of other people's cars for a week in patterns that looked like a woman pressing her face to say something urgent. The way a wife will put her face to the bathroom door and say, "Are you almost done?" "We are late, the weather is turning." Mark stopped coming by. He had a growing daughter and a wife with a list of practical needs, and he had grief of his own, and could not carry mine too. He texted and he called, and I texted back pictures I took at the mile of the thermometer readout and the fog shapes, and the way the frost writes lace along the edges of the weeds. He said, "Dad, I love you." He said, "Please stop." He said, "Please keep going." He said, "I do not know which thing to ask." None of us did. In late September, the air over the rest of the county remembered how to be pleasant. The frozen mile took no notice. The preacher on the radio talked about the wideness of mercy, and I wondered if mercy is a thing that can be scaled. You have the small mercy of a spider building a web in a doorway and always surviving boot traffic, and the broad mercy of a sky that does not fall on you, and then this mile that held people the way a freezer holds meat and called that holding something other than what it was. I took the orange line again. I did not tie off. This was not bravado. The knot on me was inside now. Lorna had not pulled. She had pushed. It came to me while I was changing out a battery on a stranded Buick, with a man whose mother sat in the passenger seat and told me at length about the weather in 1982. Lorna had pointed deeper, not back when at dusk. The west was a long smear the color of a cantaloupe rind. The wind lay flat. I left the wrecker idling with the door open and an old country song leaking out into the quiet. I did not carry anything this time. I felt the cold meet me and did not resist. The mile received. The ditch changed its mind and became a place where ditches are irrelevant. I took 3 steps, measured as a man would when walking in a church between the pews toward a funeral, and uncertain of his place. And I felt not one and many press against me in greeting like a family at Christmas. Behind the press I felt Lorna. She did not speak my name now. She said one word, not through my ears. Stay, I did not argue. The strength that had always come to me through my hands I let pass through me like I was made of wire. The cold was no longer hostile. It was simply what it was. I understood in that second how a lake seen from shore is one shape and from underwater is another, and a body can know both shapes and be at odds with neither. I understood why the breath fogs the glass of passing cars. It is not a threat. It is a tapping. It is a person inside a room without doors saying, "I am here. I am here. If you press your face close, you can almost see me." There is a man who fishes on Lake Arrowhead at night alone in a little aluminum boat, and sometimes, he says, the breath comes against the green bow light and shines around it like a halo. There is a woman who drives from Clarendon to Turkey to take care of her mother, and she keeps a towel in the truck to wipe the fog off. Except she stopped wiping because when she did, the shapes distorted into something that looked like a scream, and she could not bear it. There is a boy who rides his bike with his friends out there in the morning just past sunup, because that is when his mother cannot object, and he sticks his tongue to the stop sign for a dare, and leaves a clean patch on the metal where his warm spit licked the frost away, and he laughs with blood in his mouth and says, he will do it again tomorrow. There is me, which is to say there is not in the way you know. People say they still see my wrecker down by the yard when the sun hits the chrome just so. People say they see me on the porch with my thermos, listening to the daily complaint of the sparrows, and they wave and I do not wave back because I am thinking of something else. People say a lot of things. It has been months since Maria has seen me in the diner. She sits with her back to the door now, the way cops are not supposed to, and she holds her coffee like it might tell her how to choose. I am where I am. I am not gone. That is the part that will not comfort you and will not leave you be. If you drive the mile in August and see your glass fog, do not wipe it with your hand. Do not make a joke with your friend in the passenger seat. Do not roll down your window and stick your face out into the herd and tell yourself nothing is wrong. Put the heater on defrost if you like. It will not matter. The air in there is not your air anymore for that minute. Breathe slow. If you hear a voice, it will be a voice you know. It will ask you to stay. It will tell you the room beyond is only one step away. It will say the word as if it were a warm blanket. It will be convincing. You will feel the certainty of it run down your spine like a hand you have known your whole life. The road means for you to keep moving. That is what roads mean. You must decide if movement is obedience or escape. I remember the 2 a.m. calls, the crunch of gravel under the wrecker's tires, the way a driver looks at you after an accident as if you are the person who will translate the world back into sense. I remember Lorna's hair braided and unbraided, her hands in dishwater, her breath on the bathroom mirror making a circle while she drew a smiley face in it for our boy, long before any of this. I remember the punchline to a joke about a Baptist and a Methodist in a boat that cannot be told in decent company. The weight of an anchor, the taste of coffee you have let sit too long. It is not that I cannot come back. It is that I do not know where back is anymore. There are not coordinates. There is only this mile. It is so cold. It is the exact right temperature to keep something fresh forever. It is the wrong one to preserve a life. I do not advise you. I cannot watch the glass. When your breath fogs and then another breath fogs from some angle that makes no sense. Know that the gap between the world you can walk across and the one that wants to hold you is thinner than a windshield. Know that the difference between you and me is a string you can cut with your teeth. When I pressed my face to the inside of a stranger's car the first time after I stayed, the woman driving shivered and said a man's name that was not mine. I let my breath rest on her glass a second longer. I tried to draw a letter. It made a curl that meant nothing much. She wiped it without looking, and the towel froze for a second, and she threw it on the floor and drove on into heat that made the asphalt soften around the edges of the county. The mile lay behind her, narrow and infinite, a strip of winter laid out like a dare between fields of scrub where grasshoppers clicked and rattlesnakes warmed themselves on rocks. I watched her taillights fade, and I wanted to put a hand on her shoulder and tell her that she would be all right. Then I breathed again and made a circle on her glass as if to say, look, right here. You do not have to be alone. And for a second, she leaned closer, and her face filled the world. The first time I saw him was south of Lampasas, where 281 straightens out, and the live oaks give way to pastures and low stone fences that heave up out of the dirt like the backs of old cattle. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when the sun flattens everything and even the vultures look drunk as they teeter above the highway. He stood in the thin strip of shade cast by a green sign for a county road nobody from out of state would ever find again. Thumb-out smile stapled too wide across his face, the corners dragging at his cheeks as if held by invisible hooks. He didn't have a bag. He had on a pearl-snap shirt with dust baked into the seams and jeans gone shiny at the knees. He looked like any drifter you might see between towns except the grin, and that he was there again 22 miles past where I first saw him, thumbing the same thumb and hammering the same smile into the air like a nail. I didn't stop. You tell yourself you don't because you're thinking about insurance and muggers and the story you heard from your cousin about the guy who picked up a hitcher who pulled a razor from his boot. That's part of it. The bigger part is you don't want to be alone in a small space with that much need. Some of us are built to offer rides without looking, the way other people hold doors. I'm not. I've spent most of my life closing doors quietly behind me. I was hauling a jukebox that day, one of the old Wurlitzer models with a glass front and a footprint like a coffin. It was strapped in the back of my panel van under a quilt, humming a little from the inverter and the road. I fix and flip old pieces for bars and roadside restaurants as they trade out various versions of their souls. Jukeboxes, stand-up arcade cabinets, neon beer signs with bulbs like diseased teeth. I drive the triangle from Austin to Wichita Falls to Lubbock and back, never staying where I'm wanted long enough to find out I wasn't wanted at all. When you're alone, you get precious about your arrangements. The van smells like pine cleaner and solder smoke. The radio is taped at the volume knob because it wobbles. The vent on the driver's side whistles when I push past 68. These are the things that make up my life. That day I added a man on the shoulder with a smile that didn't bend when the rest of him did. He lifted his thumb when I came on him the first time, and I felt the old reflex twitching in my wrist to edge right like I might entertain the idea of slowing. He had the kind of face that insists on recognition, even if it belongs to nobody you've ever known. Dark hair cut cheap, sunburn knifing down the bridge of his nose. And that grin. It didn't meet his eyes because nothing did. They were like puddles on a road you can't tell the depth of until you're in them. I took him in a slice of a second and passed him. Left him to the heat haze and the grasshoppers pinging like coins off the grill. 22 miles later he was back, farther up the road, at the edge of a culvert where someone had painted their initials in red. Same clothes, same thumb, same grin. Traffic was light, a ranch truck, a minivan with curtains, my van. I didn't do the thing where you shake yourself and squint like you're dislodging a dream. I know what I saw and I trust it more than I trust people. He was there again and I drove and I didn't think about it until Hamilton, where I took a right to top off at a gas station that sold tamales from a crock behind the counter and lottery tickets from a carousel with a broken spindle. There were 3 men at the coffee station, making a ritual out of nothing, stirring sugar, tapping lids, crushing red straws with their thumbs. I was looking at a rack of beef jerky that could have doubled as roofing material when I heard one of them say, "The signs and everything," and a second one say, "Smile like that and all." I didn't turn at first, then I did because the inside of me had begun to itch. The first man, older, with a cap that said Hico Meat Market and a neck like a dried riverbed. noticed me looking and gave me the soft nod of someone who's already told the story and would be willing to tell it again if asked right. I didn't ask. I paid for gas and a pack of peanut clusters, and the kid at the register told me his manager liked jukeboxes, and I pretended to write down a number that wasn't mine. And then I went back out into the glaze of heat and rubbed at the space under my eye where the skin always twitches when I'm near something I shouldn't have to name. I told myself I'd imagined seeing him twice. The road does that. It repeats. There's not a lot of inventory out there to decorate your days, so you start sorting trees into characters and hawks into omens. If the smile was a badge of anything, it was of habitual disappointment. He'd learned to wear the smile the way a dog bears teeth by nature of living near people who are always surprised to be feared. He was in the bar ditch 5 miles north of Hiko, just where 281 slides along the Bosque River, and the water in the stones looks like it's been wet forever. I tapped the steering wheel. A cicada's corpse hit the windshield, burst in a papery scrawl, and stuck a wing to the wiper. He didn't move from where he stood, thumb up, shoes in the dust. I saw that his boots were darker than they should have been in that heat, like he'd walked through water and the leather had gulped it down and was still drinking. His grin cut his face into quarters. When my van passed, his eyes turned with me, and for the first time I saw something like a tension spark behind them. That was when my stomach did its little flip. Like I'd crested a hill too fast. I didn't stop for him or for anybody else that day. And I should tell you that out loud as if I were on the stand, to see how it feels in the room. He was there again outside Stephenville, and then again at the edge of a rest area where the bathrooms smell both like bleach and all the reasons for bleach, and then again as the sun got low and the fields filled up with the silhouettes of round bales like gigantic sleeping dogs. Eventually you stop looking directly, and you watch with the corner of your eye, because it hurts less if you pretend you're not keeping track. That night I took a cheap room at a motor court outside Mineral Wells where the neon flickered. Wells bright and Mineral dim, and the woman at the desk slid me the key on a green fob and told me the pool was closed for repairs. The jukebox pinged in the van like a cooling engine. I stood next to it with the door open and felt the night lean heavy, the way it does when heat has been stacked all day and the dark can't digest it. Somewhere close, a dog barked twice and made a decision not to bark a third time. I thought of the hitchhiker's grin where his face should have been and felt a stitch of anger untie in me. If a man wanted a ride, he ought to say where he was going. That's how people do it. Not this silent grinning and popping up like a bad coin wherever the road bent. Before sleep came, there was a sound outside the door, the soft scrape of a boot or a palm on stucco. I lay on the bed on top of the covers with one shoe still on and watched the paint peel above the air conditioner, and didn't look at the door because looking at a thing invites it in. I told myself it was a bird, a moth, a drunk getting the wrong room. I told myself many things until morning. None of them were about him. If you name a thing, you give it edges, and I wanted him soft and easy to blur. Morning is friendlier when you have a job to do. I delivered the jukebox to a roadhouse west of Jacksboro with a gravel lot, and a menu that spelled out catfish in a way that looked right, though it wouldn't have satisfied a teacher. The owner had a son who helped me unload, a boy with wrists like brooms and an eagerness that made me like him despite myself. The jukebox came up shining once I got it into its corner by the bar. We tested it. The first record that dropped was a scratchy Hank Williams, and the sound filled the place like dust motes in sun. The boy clapped and I showed him how to cycle through selection, and the owner shook my hand too hard and paid me in cash. Wrist thick with hair and a wedding band that had seen more of the world than I had. On the way out of town, the hitchhiker was standing just past a narrow county bridge with wrought iron rails that had been painted a green that insulted both metal and river. This time he didn't put up his thumb. He just watched me coming, that same grin welded on, and I realized it wasn't even a grin. Not really, not an expression, but a condition. The line of his mouth was wrong the way a scar is wrong. It didn't curve. It bent, like something under his skin was being pressed up from behind and the flesh had to accommodate it. I slowed in spite of myself until I could make out the texture of his shirt and the careful mending at the pocket. His eyes never blinked. When I passed, he pivoted, a little mechanical, and I saw the heel of one boot tear away something from the mud at the road's edge. It wasn't like he was showing me, but it was there to see. A wet trace smeared into the dust, as if he had stepped out of something that wasn't completely the business of dry land. I did the next thing a man like me does. which is find a justification. I told myself I'd ask at the next place I stopped. I told myself if I saw him one more time, I'd pull over and at least offer water. But you don't actually want the universe to hold you to your promises. By the time I reached the Brazos, the sky had thickened with clouds that stacked to the horizon like cotton bales. Heat makes menace out of weather. The bridge threw my van into a different kind of light. Halfway across the river, the radio fizzed and died. I slapped the dial, gentle enough not to break the tape, and it came back as a thread of sound that wasn't the station I'd been listening to. A woman's voice singing through a well, and for no good reason my scalp prickled. Then he was there. Not on the shoulder, but in the first sliver of gravel after the bridge, hand out, smile bright as a sign, and my foot chose for me. I pulled over. The van coasted and shuddered and stopped, and the jukebox thunked in the back as if it were impatient. The hitchhiker came to the passenger door without urgency and without hurry. Up close, he looked like a man pressed into a man's shape by whatever had worn him thin. He leaned in, and I saw that his teeth were very clean, like they'd been attended to by a careful mother or a prison dentist. He didn't reach for the handle. He put his palm on the window where I could see the whorls of his fingerprints like knots in pine, and a film bloomed where his skin met the glass. Not steam and not grease, but a kind of condensation that left small droplets behind when he pulled his hand away again. He never stopped smiling. He never made a sound. He took 2 steps back and waited. The waiting did something to me. Waiting has power. It flips the order of things. I fumbled the lock like a novice and pushed the door open. He got in as if the van belonged to him and sat with his hands loose on his knees. I felt the temperature in the cab tilt colder and smelled something that didn't belong to the road. It wasn't the sour of sweat or the rank of long-worn clothes. It was the green of lake water shaded by a spillway. It was the wet of limestone caves where the drip of years carves a calendar nobody reads. "Where are you headed?" I said, as if we were men. He stared at me with the eyes that were puddles and the smile that was a scar. He didn't speak. He didn't shrug. He turned his head and looked through the windshield at the 2 lanes unspooling and didn't blink. I eased onto the highway with the same care I would have used with a sleeping child. The radio warbled and then steadied on a station out of Wichita Falls you could only get in the high parts. His head cocked at the sound like a dog trying to parse the human world. I told myself that saying nothing might be his test of me, and I would pass it by talking anyway, so I did. I told him my name because sometimes that matters to people who have forgotten their own. I told him I drove for a living and fixed things other folks had quit on. I said I had a cousin who worked the oil fields outside Midland until his back broke without breaking, and now he stayed home and cooked and seemed happier for it. I told him about the jukebox humming like a wasp nest behind us. I told him I liked a road best when it ran next to a river or a rail line, something that keeps pace and keeps you honest. He didn't answer. I kept talking until my throat ached and stopped only when I started to hear how my voice sounded in that small space, thin and arranged, like a man trying to persuade himself he was a good one. He rode with me as far as a county line sign where someone had shot the O into a ragged halo. He lifted his hand then, pointed not forward or back but into the ditch, and I slowed because we were well past the point where I had fooled myself into thinking I was in charge. He opened the door without looking at me, stepped out without the slightest courtesy, and stood with that wrong grin watching the grass. I leaned across to look down into the ditch and saw the trickle of a narrow creek stained the color of tea by leaves and what the locals call tannins, and I call a story. There were minnows in the slow pools and a crawdad with one claw waving like a signal man. There were boot prints like stamps farther along the mud. He watched the water with his head angled a little, not all the way curious and not all the way empty. He turned then and rolled his shoulders as if the shape he wore had grown tight, and when he looked at me again, the smile seemed to pull at him from the inside. He lifted his hand in a sort of salute, palm out, and then he was simply gone from the ditch and standing 10 yards up the road where the shoulder widened and the grass went thin. He hadn't crossed the distance. He had bypassed it. It felt like the moment when you realize you've missed a stare in the dark, and every part of you adjusts for a fall that doesn't come. I drove. I didn't mean to. It's just what I do. In the mirror, he stood smaller and then small, and then was not there. 2 miles later, he was in front of me again at the edge of a pasture where the cows had lined up to watch the highway pass by as if it were a parade. I drove around him wide and too fast. I didn't stop after that. I didn't stop until I was at a truck stop outside of Decatur, where the coffee is terrible and the pie is acceptable and the Woman at the counter has a tattoo of roses running all up her forearm and a starched collar that never relaxes. I told her what I'd seen because she looked like she had heard versions of everything and could file mine away without and with belief. Her mouth twitched once at the corner when I said the smile, and she nodded like a prayer was being said 3 states away. "Don't stop," she said, and there was no drama in it. "That's what they say. Don't stop and don't look back if you already did." "What happens if you stop?" I said, as if I hadn't already. "Sometimes nothing," she said. "Sometimes they don't get where they were going. Sometimes they show up again where you think they ought to be gone by now. Sometimes you wake up and your face hurts from the inside like everything you do is an argument between your bones and your skin." "What is he?" I said, and the word came out thin. She shrugged. The shrug said it didn't matter to her any more than the name of the storm matters to the fence it blows down. "Some folks died on the road you're on. Some years back," she said after a bit, picking at a splash of caramel hardened on the counter. "Van full of kids, driver up front seeing another man in the shoulder and not watching the bridge. Went in at a bad angle and the water took on what it could take on. Or they say a man got clipped walking across by the dam, and when they found him the muscles in his face had seized up just like he was happy about it. Which the deputy said was cruel because nobody was happy in that whole business. Or a thing older than both of those stories was there already, long before the road, waiting for people to drag it around in cars so it didn't have to walk." I didn't sleep well in Decatur. There was a grinning man inside my eyelids. I kept my hands under my head to keep them from reaching for the door. I was not built for caring, and yet somehow a sliver of it had got under my nail and now I couldn't stop worrying at it. If he could be carried, he would be. If he could be dragged, he would be. I thought of the jukebox humming to itself in the dark and wanted very much to be a machine with a simple job. The drive back ran me a different way, south and then west toward Llano, where the granite pushes up like old bones and the river flattens itself out and pretends it's tame. I told myself I'd avoid the bridge where the radio had died, as if that mattered. I told myself a different route was a different story. The thing about different stories is they often share the same ending. At the outskirts of Burnett, I saw him again. He stood in the shadow of a billboard advertising a lakefront development that had been planned before the drought and was now 3 tiers of yellow dirt and some benches nobody ever sat on. Thumb out, smile wrong, eyes like water you could drown in without moving. He inclined his head to me and I felt something take shape in my chest. Not a thought, but a blueprint of one. The road tightened like a belt. There were blue bonnets gone to seed in the ditch, brown spires where there had been blue in April, and the crickets made the kind of noise you think is in your own ears. I slowed again because I had already stopped once and my logic had gone out the window with the heat. He opened the passenger door without waiting and slid in like he belonged there because he did. We drove toward the lake without saying it. He didn't point this time. He didn't smile any more or any less. He looked straight ahead, his hands on his knees, and the air in the van turned cool and then cold enough my skin pebble lifted. We passed the turnoff for Kingsland where the slabs wear scars of baptism and beer cans, and I kept going because we both knew where we would stop. The dam crouched ahead like a geometry lesson. Concrete and spillway and rails rubbed smooth by the slow passage of all the small parts of the world, and the river below looked harmless in that polite way water has. I parked in the gravel lot by the overlook where old men go to remember and kids go to do what kids do. And he sat heavy beside me like the kind of sleep you can't wake from without help. "What do you want?" I said, because I am not clever. He turned to me then and his eyes were wet in the way of a pond's surface when a soft rain begins. A ripple you feel without needing to hear it. The grin widened because it had to, because whatever owned it wanted me to see its edges. All at once I understood it was not a man's smile but a door's. I scraped back across the seat and the plastic side under me. He lifted his hand, palm outward, and I pressed mine to it before I understood I was doing it. His skin was warm and slick, not unclean, not clean, like a thing fitted lately into a temperature it hadn't bothered with before. He turned our pressed hands 90 degrees the way you would turn a key. The radio died again and the jukebox in the back started to play without power, a glassy tinkle like ice falling down a well. We sat like that, hands braced until the blood in my hand beat a special drum, and when he took his hand away, mine stung like I'd touched nettles. He got out of the van and did not wait for me. He walked to the rail and stood and looked down, and the wind pushed at my shirt with fingers and I followed, because I never get off at the right exit. He stepped onto the concrete shelf beside the rail, boots scraping, And I thought of how some men stand on ledges as if to prove to themselves they are the ones who get to say no to gravity. The river was quiet. Just below the spillway there was a boil of white that folded and unfolded in a place where water blackened again and kept going as if nothing had happened to it. He lifted his hands there and the grin on his face ticked wider, and my teeth began to ache in their beds. There were names carved into the rail, the chisel work of boys and girls who wanted to last. One of the names was mine, though I have never carved a thing into anything. I touched it. The groove was shallow and new. "Is that it?" I asked him. Because at the end, men ask simple, dumb questions in the hope that answers will be simple and dumb too. He tipped his head, and for the first time the grin was a little less wrong, as if he were letting it rest. The corner of his mouth twitched. You could have lied and said he nearly smiled for real. He stepped off the concrete onto air or the idea of it, and my hand closed on his sleeve out of reflex or habit or that human trick of saving someone who doesn't care to be saved. My fingers slid over the cloth like it was wet glass and then were on his wrist where the pulse should be. There was one beat there, a big and lonely one, and then no other. He was falling but not down. I don't know how else to say it. He was dropping into a space that did not require the river to be at the bottom. I fell with him, because that is what happens when you take hold. It did not last long. The space is only a finger's width away from where we stand, and most of the time we don't notice. I know the smell of it now. Lake stone, algae, old cold. He wasn't heavy. He wasn't light. He was the exact weight of every time I'd looked away when something asked me to look full on. And then he was gone from my hand, and I was on my knees on the concrete with my palms scraped, and the shape of his grin inside my fingers. And a ranger was shouting, and a woman was crying into her phone, and a boy was taking a picture because that is what boys do now, so when they are older they can pretend the proof is something other than a moment they didn't use. They never found him because there was nothing to find. That's what the ranger told me in a voice you use for someone who might confess if you are gentle. He said I looked like I needed a doctor. He said sometimes people get pulled where they ought not to go because the river is tricky and doesn't like to let go. I nodded. I let him tell his story because he needed it. I did not tell him mine because I knew how it would sound in a report. A man who sees a man who isn't a man and goes over a rail and comes back with hands that smell like wet copper and a head full of white noise. I left there at dusk and drove without the radio. You can drive that way if you choose. The road makes its own sound. The sky had turned the color of bruised peaches, and the bats came out in a seam along the dam and stitched the air. I saw him again at the next mile marker. He was standing in the shoulder with his thumb up. Only now I knew it wasn't his thumb any more than the smile was his. It was a sign you hold up for people like me. I slowed because pattern is stronger than choice. He turned his head as I neared, and though the smile was still wrong in the way a door is wrong when you're the one locked outside, the eyes looked different. Not kinder. Not crueler, not empty, not full. They were mine, and deep down in that wrong grin I saw my own mouth trying to make sense of what it had learned to do. That was the shape of the ending I thought I had arrived at. That I would stop and he would get in and ride with me, and I would ride with myself until there was nothing left to carry. Instead, he did nothing at all except be there. And I drove on, and 5 miles later he was there again. The smile not changing. The thumb not changing, the eyes not changing. Only the scenery shifting around him like the backdrop in a cheap play you don't remember paying to see. I tried all the tricks you try when you're tangled in something you don't want to name. I took a farm road that offered no reason to exist. I passed through Bertram and Oatmeal and a place that might not have been a place. I stopped at a store and bought water and poured it down the front of my shirt. I sat in the van with the door open and watched a moth beat itself senseless against the courtesy light. When I shut the door and started the engine, he was at the far end of the lot, by the propane tank cage, thumb up, smile wrong. It is all right to tell you what happened, because it has already happened the way weather happens and happens again. I pulled over at last where the highway shoulders narrow to nothing, and the grass is full of little spiders that lift their front legs as if in greeting. He got in without asking. My hands on the wheel felt like someone else's. He didn't look at me and I didn't look at him. We drove and the road unrolled and the blue milk of night pooled in the ditches and the jukebox hummed and sometimes hit a note like a crystal bowl, and he smelled like a lake not yet named. I knew where we were going because once you learn a path, you can't unlearn it. He knew it too. He always has. This is the part that ends and doesn't. The dam, the rail, The exhale of the spillway. The carved name that wasn't carved until it was. He got out. I got out. He lifted his hand and we pressed our palms together as if we could be married to a thing if we tried. He turned our hands like a key again, and this time the door opened both ways. If you think I'm going to tell you I became him, you are wrong and not wrong. It isn't that easy. He is a place, not a person. He is what happens when we make a habit of not stopping and then stop once. When we make a habit of stopping and then don't. He is the smile we put on when the inside has already been decided. He is the road organizing itself into a shape you recognize so you can let it inside without a fight. He is the last hitchhiker and the first. The man at the shoulder at dusk in Texas or anywhere else that wears heat like a shroud and miles like a promise. If you go that way, you will see him. If you stop, he will ride with you as far as the next water where he learned to be himself. If you don't stop, you will see him again and again with the exact same grin, because what you refuse to carry will wait for you farther on until you pick it up without knowing you did. I'm driving now. The road is familiar and not at all. The jukebox in the back hums a note that never resolves. Sometimes my face hurts like I've been laughing for hours. When I pass the old county bridges, I catch the smell of wet rock in my throat and try not to swallow. On good days, I can go miles without seeing him. And on bad ones, he is in every shadow thrown by a green highway sign that points to a town I once used as an excuse. I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. It won't help them and it won't help you. But every few miles I see the same man thumbing for a ride, grin too wide, too fixed, and drivers who stop tell each other he never speaks and only stares, and drivers who keep driving often see him again, waiting farther down the road. And if you come this way and meet me here in the seam where water teaches concrete the stories it knows, maybe I'll be the one with my hand out and my smile wrong and my eyes trying to meet your eyes, and maybe you will stop because you are built for it or because you can't stand to be followed anymore. And in the sound of the river and the jukebox and the engine that never shuts off, I will turn your palm like a key and we will open. And afterward you will drive and I will stand and the road will take us in whatever directions roads do when they go both ways at once.